Chapter 140. Chapter 136. Have you ever had me in your heart? Chip felt that he was really down on his luck today. Two drunkards were entangling him. If it was in the past, as a trusted subordinate of the Crown Prince, his martial arts skills would naturally be extraordinary. Although he was not good at military strategy, his personal strength was not inferior to these frontline generals. It's just that, this fight was really vexing. Green and Roar were unreasonable. After getting drunk, they just surrounded Chip and fought fiercely. Chip resisted with all his might. With his strength, he was not afraid if it was one-on-one, but one against two, he was in a difficult situation. Fortunately, the two drunkards' attacks were a little messy when they were drunk, but Chip knew their identities and did not dare to hit them too hard. If he really hurt either of them, he would be the unlucky one in the end. He was just a trusted subordinate of the Crown Prince, and the other party were the backbone of the Eagle faction. If the royal family wanted to fight against the military warlords, they would have to rely on the Eagle faction. After fighting for a long time, Chip tried to find an opportunity to escape several times. Although he did not dare to hurt the other party, he did not want to be hurt by them for no reason either. After fighting for a while, the commotion caused by the fight attracted the attention of the bystanders. Suddenly, he heard voices coming from the backyard, and a few figures staggered out. Someone is fighting? What a strong combat energy! It looks like, that person is General Roar. Among the few people who came out from the backyard, one of them was Fatso. The one whose body size was comparable to Roar was none other than Gurode from the Lantis Chamber of Commerce, whom Shea met on the way to the capital. Beside Gurode was a man wearing a tight warrior's robe with a slender sword at his waist. His face was full of heroic spirit. It was the black-armored warrior of the Wolf Fong Regiment, Alfracat. It turned out that Shea had originally planned to send someone to contact them after they had settled down in the imperial capital. However, he had been busy dealing with those people who had harassed and provoked him. Later on, he had been busy with other matters, so he had been delayed. Gurode's actual identity was Lantis's intelligence chief. Since he had spent so much effort to befriend Shea, he naturally wouldn't break off this line so easily. This guy was a meticulous person. He did not rashly take the initiative to look for Shea. Instead, he stared at Alfracat. Shea had befriended the 50 Wolf Fong Regiment and even helped them fend off the ambush along the way, forming a deep friendship. Even if Shea didn't look for him in the future, he would definitely contact Alfracat. As long as he kept Alfracat in suspense, he wouldn't be afraid that he wouldn't have a chance to contact Shea. Therefore, after arriving in the imperial capital, Gurode sent someone to the inn near the pier in the southern part of the city to look for the 50 Wolf Fong Regiment. Everyone had formed a friendship along the way and had fended off an ambush together. Moreover, that ambush was purely targeted at the 50 Wolf Fong Regiment. Alfracat could be considered to have owed Lantis a favor. In addition, a shrewd person like Gurode had taken the initiative to befriend him. Naturally, he did it flawlessly. In these few days, the relationship between both parties had warmed up very quickly. Tonight, Gurode acted as the host and invited Alfracat out for a drink. Coincidentally, the location was also set at this brothel. After drinking for so long, the alcohol had already worn off. The few of them staggered out from the back door and were just about to go to the latrine in the backyard. Just as they came out, they saw 3 figures fighting in the backyard. Originally, in this kind of brothel, it was normal for customers to have some disputes after getting drunk. It was not rare to see such a scene. However, the 3 people fighting in the backyard were all glowing with dazzling fighting energy. The level of fighting energy was one higher than the other. Taking a closer look, they realized that they were all high-ranking martial warriors. This was a little unusual. Taking a closer look, the 2 of them immediately recognized that one of them was General Fatso Roar. When they first entered the city, Alphracat had already seen Roar from afar. Although he was drunk now, he still recognized him. Gurode, who was beside him, was far more shocked than the leader of the Wolf Fang regiment beside him. As the elite intelligence of Lantis, Gurode knew the upper echelons of the Byzantine Empire like the back of his hand, especially the important figures in Ostgila. He knew all kinds of information about these important figures like the back of his hand. He even drew pictures of their appearances and studied them carefully. The three people fighting at this moment, one of them was the newly appointed general of the 13th Corps of the Byzantine Empire, Roar. Although Roar did not have a good reputation, he was still able to be appointed as the general of the 13th Division of the Byzantine Empire's Iron Army. No matter what, it was enough for him to enter the ranks of the top generals with real power. The other guy with the light golden fighting energy looked a little unfamiliar. After all, Grim had been idle for many years and was not well known. The warrior who was besieged by the two of them was handsome. Although he could not see clearly in the dark, Gurode immediately recognized him. This person was the most trusted warrior of His Highness the Crown Prince of the Byzantine Empire, Chip. He could not help but be stunned when he recognized him. Roar was the backbone of the Eagle clan in the army, and the Eagle Rhinoceros had always been loyal to the royal family. How did he end up fighting with the Crown Prince's confidant? While Gurode was still in shock, Alphracat beside him could not stand it anymore. He was deeply indebted to Shea and was naturally grateful to Shea. When he saw Roar greet Shea at the city gate that day, he knew that this General Fatso was Shea's friend. Since he was the friend of his benefactor, how could he just stand by and watch as they fought? Alphracat was a man who clearly distinguished between gratitude and grudges. Seeing this scene, he did not hesitate and pulled out his sword. He shouted, "General Roar, I'll help you." After saying that, he jumped forward. His strength was a level lower than the three of them. He only had mid-level fighting energy, but at this moment, he did not hesitate and joined the fight. Chip grumbled in his heart. He saw that the other side had another helper. The newcomer's fighting aura was average, but his swordsmanship was sharp and strange. Alphracat knew that his strength was not on the same level as these people, so he simply used the shadow swordsmanship to wander around the perimeter, occasionally stabbing his sword in. Chip was already sweating profusely, and it was getting harder and harder for him to defend. Gurode, who was watching from the side, saw that Chip was getting more and more dangerous. Suddenly, a trace of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. A good opportunity. No matter why they were fighting, if he could take this opportunity to kill Chip, the Crown Prince's confidant here, then the Eagle clan and the Byzantium royal family would have enmity. No matter what, it would be beneficial for the Lantis people. Gurode's eyes flashed. The few followers beside him were all Lantis warriors. He said in a low voice, "Go. Think of a way to kill that guy who is being surrounded." The few Lantis warriors understood and pulled out their weapons to surround him. The few Lantis warriors joined the fight, and immediately, their moves were ruthless and fatal. This time, Chip was scared out of his wits. The chaotic fight between Green and Roar was obviously a drunken brawl, but these new guys were aiming for his vitals. They obviously wanted to kill him here. Chip was sweating profusely, and he was extremely anxious. Today, he was persuaded by Adeline's pleas and secretly brought her out. In order to keep it a secret, he did not bring a single follower. He thought that with his own strength and in the imperial capital, he would not encounter any danger. How could he have known that something like this would happen? With so many people ganging up on him, even though Chip's strength had reached the level of a high-ranked warrior, he still couldn't defend himself. He also didn't have a weapon, so after a few exchanges, he was surrounded by danger. He cried out a few times as his shoulder was cut in the midst of the chaotic battle. Chip's heart was filled with rage, and he immediately felt a bit of despair. At this time, Green and Roar suddenly came back to their senses. Although the two of them were drunk and muddle-headed, They also felt that something was wrong with the sudden appearance of so many helpers. Seeing that a few people rushed over to join their side, the two of them looked at each other and jumped out of the fight at the same time. Roar glared and shouted, "Where did these bastards come from? Lao Tzu fights for fun, why do we need you to interfere? Get lost." As he spoke, he reached out to grab a Lantis warrior. The warrior was pressed down on his shoulder, but without orders from his superior, he did not dare to fight back against Roar. Roar grabbed him and threw him away. Green also shook his head and said, "All of you get lost." However, his target was Alfracat. Among these guys, Alfracat's martial arts were stronger than the other Lantis warriors. Green immediately rushed over and threw a punch. Alfracat did not want to fight with him and dodged back. A light golden fighting aura smashed onto the tip of his sword, and immediately the sword hummed. Alfracat groaned and his face paled. He took a few steps back and ran far away. Since Roar did not want to fight, Alfracat consciously stopped as well. However, the other Lantis warriors were different. They had received orders to kill Chip here, and their attacks became more and more ruthless. Without Roar and Green attacking him from the side, the pressure on Chip was greatly reduced. Seeing that these newcomers wanted to kill him, he no longer stayed behind and fought back with all his strength. 2 heavy blows in a row, his fighting aura broke the opponent's dagger, and then he kicked the lower abdomen of a Lantis warrior. That person flew back and spat out blood. Chip took the opportunity to jump out and escape. One of the Lantis warriors had a bow and arrow with him. He took it, drew the bow, and shot an arrow. In the darkness, Chip heard the sound of something breaking through the air. He suddenly dodged back and swung his fist to deflect an arrow flying towards his face. His heart skipped a beat and he shouted, This bow and arrow. You are Lantis people? Why did you sneak attack me?" The Lantis warriors hesitated. Seeing that Chip had already retreated far away, they didn't know if they should continue chasing. On the other hand, the 2 drunkards, Roar and Green, who were sweating for a while, gradually sobered up. When Roar heard Lantis, he immediately jumped up. "Lantis people? Where are they?" In this battle, the Byzantine army had already confirmed that Lantis people were secretly supporting Odin's invading army. Naturally, they hated Lantis. When he heard Chip's words, Fatso immediately became angry. He turned around and glared at Gurod and the others. Is it you?" After saying that, Fatso rushed forward. Gurod was helpless. His martial arts weren't good enough, so he could only dodge backwards. A few of his subordinates immediately turned around to block Fatso. Green also snorted, "You dare to hit my friend? You're courting death." The 2 guys left Chip and focused their attention on Gurod and the others. This time, Gurod was caught unprepared. He could only rely on the Lantis warriors to resist. The attack of 2 high-grade warriors was no small matter. Fortunately, Fatso and Green were only drunk and didn't intend to kill, so they didn't use too much force. Chip didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He glanced at the 2 drunkards and sighed in relief. Looks like these 2 guys didn't want to kill me. There must be a misunderstanding. However, these Lantis people clearly wanted to kill me when they attacked me. This definitely isn't a misunderstanding. Chip's heart sank at this thought. He immediately shouted, "General Roar, capture these Lantis people. They're not good people." After saying that, he turned around and attacked. Alfracat was a little confused. He was helping Roar fight, so why did Roar turn around and attack his own people? He didn't dare to fight Roar, but when he saw Chip coming forward, he immediately blocked him and attacked Chip with his sword. This time, it became a chaotic battle, but the situation was reversed. Chip's strength was far superior to Alfracat's, and he forced Alfracat to retreat. Gurod and the other Lantis people were also beaten back pathetically by Roar and Green. Gurod knew that he couldn't take advantage of them today. If they continued to fight, their identities would be exposed. He made a prompt decision and shouted, General Roar, we were helping you just now. We're not bad people. He shouted again, we're Shea's friends. When Roar heard this, although he was a little confused, he couldn't help but slow down and stop. That little country bumpkin's friends? Gurode immediately took the opportunity to retreat with his people and shouted, sorry for the offense. General, I'll come and apologize another day. Alfracat, let's go. Alfracat couldn't hold on any longer. He could only rely on the shadow sword technique to barely dodge. When he heard Gurode's words, he immediately turned and ran. Chip wanted to chase after him, but Roar stopped him and shouted, that's our friend's friend. You bastard, haven't you hit him enough? After saying that, he threw a punch. Chip was so angry that he spat out blood. He could only retreat, but he could only watch as Gurode and the others ran to the entrance of the courtyard. They even bowed to Roar, and with a wave of his hand they all left together. Bastard Roar! You bastard! Chip stomped his feet and cursed, flying into a rage. Green, who was beside him, had already sobered up a little. He had already staggered back and stood to the side. He only frowned as he looked at Chip, and then looked at Lantis and the others who had left. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he was still a little drunk. As for what was wrong, he couldn't say. Chip pointed at Roar's nose and cursed. Roar was blown by the cold wind and shivered. He carefully looked at Chip, and then reluctantly said, you look a little familiar. Chip spat. He took out a badge and waved it in the air. You drunkard, fatty. I'm Chip. Chip, who serves His Highness the Crown Prince. Fatso narrowed his eyes and walked a few steps closer. His nose was almost touching Chip's face. Chip could smell the alcohol on Fatso's body and couldn't help but cover his nose. Ah, it really is Chip. Roar laughed drunkenly. I remember you. And why are you here? When did you get here? Why am I here? Chip was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. Of course I'm here because of you bastard. Since the situation had turned out this way, Chip was worried about Adeline who was upstairs. These few fights had wasted at least 2 hours of time. He was anxious and didn't want to get entangled with this fatso. After he sobered up, it wouldn't be too late to settle the score later. Chip snorted. He flicked his sleeves and ran out the door. Roar and Green looked at each other, dumbfounded. Fatso rubbed his head. My brain is a little muddled. Just now, something seemed wrong. Green also frowned and suddenly laughed. If you want to fight, then fight. Don't worry about it. He laughed loudly. Lao Tzu hasn't gotten drunk so happily for many years. Refreshing. With that, he grabbed Roar's arm. Let's go. Let's drink another 100 pots. Chip hurried outside and had the carriage ready to stop at the back door. He then quickly turned back into the building and ran all the way upstairs. He was injured and his clothes were stained with blood. He couldn't help but attract the attention of others. A few passing attendants saw Chip's appearance and their expressions were a little strange. Chip ran to the room on the second floor in one breath. He lifted the curtain and looked inside. There was no one inside. Chip was extremely shocked. If Adeline was lost, then the responsibility was not something he could bear. He was anxious and in pain. He couldn't help but feel his legs go weak. He was sweating all over. He put his hand on the wall and almost staggered and lost his balance. He bit his lip hard. His mind buzzed and suddenly went blank. It turned out that when Chip was being besieged in the backyard, the pitiful creature was in a sorry state, and there were still traces of tears at the corners of his eyes. The damned country bumpkin beside him had already turned over and was snoring loudly. His snoring was as loud as thunder, and he was sprawled on his back. One of his legs was even pressing against his waist. The poor thing felt that her body was about to fall apart. Her whole body was sore and weak. Pain was everywhere. This damned bastard, he was simply a pig. A breeding pig. After calming down, she suddenly felt that her body was a little cold. She touched her chest and found that it was bare, causing the poor girl to tremble. She struggled to sit up, but immediately, she seemed to have touched a certain part of her body. She cried out in pain and frowned. Apart from the pain on her face, her cheeks also seemed to be smeared with a layer of red. Forcefully pushing the country bumpkin next to her, the poor thing sat at the head of the bed. Thinking of what had just happened, she couldn't help but feel sad. Looking at Shea, who was sleeping soundly and reeking of alcohol, a few drops of tears fell from the poor thing's eyes. You bastard! The poor thing was filled with hatred. She reached out to hit Shea, but when her hand fell on Shea's face, her fingertips trembled and could not help but soften. She gently slid her hand across Shea's face. Her fingertips traced the contours of Shea's face. The tenderness in her heart surged. How could she be ruthless? For a moment, looking at Shea's sleeping face, she could not help but be dazed. Find a good craftsman and inlay a gold tooth. There's a tavern owner in our town who has 2 gold teeth. Every time he smiles, his mouth is full of golden light. Don't mention how impressive it is. When I was young, when I went into the mountains to chop firewood, I would bring a live rabbit with me. I would first break the rabbit's leg. If I encountered a wolf, I would throw the rabbit down to attract the wolf's attention while I ran away. That's why I brought you to hunt a dragon. It's the same principle. Hey, what kind of knot did you tie on my chest with a piece of cloth? It's to fix the cloth. I know it's to fix the cloth, but the way you tied it is so strange. What is this? It's so complicated. You wasted a lot of cloth. Butterfly knot. Butterfly knot? What's the use of it? It's pretty. We can form an opera troupe and earn money in Wildfire Town. You're so ugly, you can play the role of a clown. And I can perform breaking boulders on my chest and rolling nails on a board. The words of the country bumpkin on the Wildfire Plains suddenly jumped into her mind. Adeline's heart was as tender as water. She looked at Shea with hidden bitterness. For a moment, whether it was love or hate in her heart, even she herself could not tell. Forget it. These are all destined by the heavens. Just consider it as me, Adeline, owing you. The poor thing bit his lips. Looking at Shea's familiar face, he suddenly bent down and lightly kissed Shea's cheek. Buying a house on the Wildfire Plains, raising a few horses, and then forming an opera troupe to earn money. That kind of life must be very beautiful. Perhaps he could stay by this guy's side and watch his heartless smile every day, watch him talk nonsense, watch him make a fool of himself. Also, he would raise that big shield and he would sit on his shoulder. Adeline's heart was in a mess. She slowly got off the bed. The pain on her body made her face turn red again. She glared fiercely at the country bumpkin. Looking at the torn clothes on the floor and the bed, she hugged her chest and looked left and right. With a glance, she saw the unconscious woman in white on the floor. She went over and took off her outer clothes and put them on. Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. However, as she moved, she could not help but feel pain. It made her face turn red again. She did not know how many times she had cursed this country bumpkin in her heart. After finally doing all this, Adeline stood beside the bed and quietly looked at the country bumpkin who was sleeping soundly. This guy. Even when he was sleeping, he was still so disobedient and sprawled out on all fours. A country bumpkin will always be a country bumpkin. Hey, country bumpkin. Adeline's eyes were filled with tenderness. Looking at Shea, she spoke in a low voice. Although she knew that Shea would not respond at this moment, she still spoke in a low voice as if she was crazy. In her voice, there was an indelible feeling that could not be erased. Actually, let me tell you, I am a girl. You always bully me. One day, I will get back at you. You always say that I am ugly, but I am clearly very beautiful. I heard that you were promoted, but you have to be careful of my brother. You have to work harder. Only when you really become rich, then you and I can. Don't make me wait too long, or else. Adeline did not know how much she had said in such a low voice. It was as if the words that had been tangled in her heart for these days and nights had all been said out loud. Finally, she stood up and looked at the sleeping Shea. Her lips trembled. I have to go. You have to take care. Don't come to this kind of place again. After speaking, she quietly looked at Shea on the bed. 2 drops of tears flowed down her face. Country bumpkin, Shea, one more thing. I like you. In your heart, do you have a poor thing? After speaking, a fragrant wind drifted and her figure disappeared. Give me some monthly vote. I haven't written any emotional scenes in a long time. As for the reason, I won't say. This chapter's emotional scenes made my heart palpitate. The emotions are also a little strange. Let's not talk about it. Let's pull the monthly vote. There are only 30 hours left. The opponents for the monthly votes are fierce. I have already done my best. The rest will depend on everyone's support. Please check your accounts to see if you still have any monthly vote. If you do, please vote. There is more than one monthly vote. You might not even know that you have bought a new monthly vote. Take a look and vote. It won't take much time. Yes, that's all. Please, to be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 141. GOR Chapter 137. Too evil. Chip stared blankly for a long time before slapping his head. That's right. Next door. Her Highness must have gone next door to find that brat. Chip was stunned for a while, then he suddenly came back to his senses. He immediately turned around and ran out, but just as he reached the door, the curtain was suddenly pulled open, and a figure flashed in. The 2 of them almost bumped into each other, and they both cried out, "Ah!" Chip stared at the person in front of him. "Isn't that Adeline?" Adeline's face was flustered and her cheeks were flushed. When she bumped into Chip, she cried out in alarm and stepped back. Her eyes were filled with panic. "Your Highness!" Chip was pleasantly surprised. In his excitement, he did not notice Adeline's panic. He quickly led Adeline into the room and whispered, "Where did you go?" Adeline stammered for a moment before whispering, I saw that you went out for a long time. I was worried and wanted to go out to find you." Chip sighed and looked at the princess in front of him. Suddenly, his expression changed. Your clothes." Adeline's face suddenly turned red. Her original clothes had been torn to shreds by the country bumpkin. Now, she was wearing the white robe she took from the girl in white. Seeing Chip's suspicion, Adeline pretended to be calm. "And, just now when I went out to find you, I accidentally knocked over a waiter. The wine stained my clothes, so I went to a room and stole a coat from the closet." She then mumbled, "Okay, it's already late. We have to go back before brother finds out." Chip was still a bit confused, but Adeline was right. Time was of the essence, so he could only let it go. Chip immediately went out and looked around before leading Adeline away. But when they went downstairs, Chip was walking in front when he heard Adeline's soft cry of, "Ouch!" He turned around and saw that Her Highness was frowning. Her pink lips were pursed and she appeared to be in pain. Aside from the pain, there was also a trace of shyness. "And Your Highness?" "I'm fine." Adeline pretended as if nothing had happened. "I accidentally sprained my ankle just now. Let's go. Don't waste time." The 2 drunkards, Roar and Green, had been delayed somewhere. When they came back, the room was in a mess. The 2 of them lay on the soft couch and rested for a while before they gradually sobered up. "Why is Lao Tzu's eye socket so painful?" "Aha! I remember now, you seem to have kicked my butt just now." The 2 fellows looked at each other and burst into laughter at the same time. Green slapped his thigh and said, "Tonight's wine is going to be great. I haven't been so drunk in years." Roar burped, then squinted his eyes and laughed. Haha, I remember the last time I got so drunk was at the Duke's 60th birthday party. The two of them suddenly became silent. They looked at each other and sighed for a while. After a while, the two irresponsible fellows suddenly remembered. Fatso looked at Green and said, I remember. There seems to be another person. Shea, where did that kid go? Green smiled and said, I remember now. How did it become the two of us while we were drinking? Don't worry, are you afraid of getting lost here? I'm afraid he was carried to some girl's bed. With that, the two of them sat up and looked around. Green reached out and pointed to the small door at the back of the room. Look, that kid must be inside. We're fighting outside, but he's having fun. Roar was indignant, but he completely forgot that it was the two drunkards who ran away by themselves. He got up and pulled Green directly through the small door. Just as the two of them were about to go in, they heard Shea's shout from inside. Ah! The country bumpkin sat up from the bed. His naked upper body was full of sweat, and his forehead was also soaked with sweat. He was panting. He suddenly had a nightmare in his sleep. He dreamed that he was standing in a flame, and his whole body was anxious and unbearable. The fire was so hot that even his heart was about to split open. There seemed to be a group of blood-spewing monsters with red faces and fangs in the flames. They roared at him, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. One by one, they pounced on him. In his anxiety, he turned his hand to pull out the fire fork, but in his dream, he found that the fire fork was not by his side. At this moment, he suddenly saw a figure rush into the flames. It was as if a cool and refreshing water poured down and enveloped him. Suddenly, the burning heat of the flames finally disappeared. Only that the water light enveloped him, and seemed to be gently rolling back and forth. In the water light, there seemed to be a vague figure emerging. Who is it? The country bumpkin tried to see clearly. His hands grabbed and pushed, and with great effort, he finally pulled out the fog. Finally, a face emerged, but it was so familiar. It was staring at him, angry, and seemed to be a little reproachful and a little angry. When he took a closer look, it was actually the poor thing that he had not seen for a long time. Shea's shock was no small matter. He suddenly felt his whole body tremble, and then instinctively reached out to grab, but he grabbed empty air. At this time, the surrounding flame beasts attacked again. The pitiful worm was bitten and pulled away by the beasts, getting further and further away from him. Shea chased with all his might. Boundless anger welled up in his heart. He flew into a rage and rushed forward, punching and kicking, finally driving away all the flame beasts. But in the end, his whole body's strength suddenly disappeared, and he weakly lay on the ground. In his dream, the poor thing approached him and looked into his eyes. That face was clearly familiar, but that expression was something that he had never seen before in his life. He faintly felt that something was wrong. It seemed that such an expression should not appear on the face of his good brother, the poor thing. But the subtle thing was that at this moment the country bumpkin instinctively felt that such a gaze, such an expression, made him faintly feel a sense of pleasure in his heart. In his dream, the poor thing approached him. That familiar face had a gentle look, and then the poor thing said, "I like you. Do you have me in your heart?" Hearing this, Shea's whole body suddenly shook, and then he screamed, "Ah!" and woke up from his dream. He felt all the hairs on his body stand up, and he shivered more than a dozen times. The feeling of fear in his heart still lingered. Damn it! Damn it! Lao Tzu must have gone crazy. How could he have such a strange dream? Damn it! It must be because of Oaks. Because of that sky attack. Damn it, could it be that Brokeback Mountain is also contagious? After sneezing fiercely, Shea shook his head and completely woke up. Suddenly, his vision cleared and he saw a fat face looking at him with concern. "Shea, what happened to you?" After experiencing that kind of scene in his dream, his heart was palpitating with fear. Suddenly, a fat and wretched face came so close to him. Shea instinctively shouted, "Ghost!" Without hesitation, he threw a punch. Bang! Roar screamed. He covered his eye sockets and flew back, smashing into the corner of the wall. Green stood a little further away from the bed. Seeing Roar send Shea flying, he clapped his hands and laughed heartily. Good, good, good. Good hit. Shea heard Roar's screams and woke up. He calmed down and realized that he had hit the wrong person. He quickly jumped out of bed. Fatso, are you okay? Roar sat in the corner and saw the country bumpkin jump out of bed naked. He couldn't help but curse. Bastard, you've had enough fun. Lao Tzu kindly woke you up to go home, but you actually hit Lao Tzu. Shea laughed. Suddenly, his legs went soft. He couldn't help but feel dizzy and his mouth was dry. He sat down on the bed and immediately felt that something was wrong. Shea wasn't unfamiliar with this feeling of weakness and dizziness. It wasn't like he hadn't been drunk before, so this kind of symptom wasn't strange. But his whole body was naked. His clothes seemed to have been torn into pieces and scattered on the bed. This was a bit strange, and he subconsciously felt that somewhere in his body there was something strange. Although he was a virgin, he was no longer one. He was still an adult after all. It wasn't like he didn't really know anything. In the past, there would be some nights when his blood and chi were vigorous, and he would have some strange and beautiful dreams in his sleep. He still couldn't remember the dream, but he couldn't forget the feeling of excitement in the dream. Then, when he woke up in the morning, he would most likely find himself shamelessly horse riding. At this moment, he subconsciously touched the base of his thigh and felt something sticky. No matter how thick-skinned this country bumpkin was, there were still two old men in front of him. His face immediately turned red and blood almost seeped out. He looked up again and saw Roar sitting in the corner, covering his eyes and groaning. Next to him, Green was smiling sneakily. He then saw a girl lying on the ground. Her jade body was lying naked. Her face looked like the girl who served him last night when he was drinking. Seeing this scene, the country bumpkin's heart thumped. Could it be that Lao Tzu unknowingly lost his virginity in his sleep? Thinking of this, his expression became even more strange. Okay. Green held back his laughter. Seeing that Shea's clothes were torn, he thought to himself, he's a young boy after all. He's so impatient. It seems that Fatso was right when he said that this kid was a virgin. Green was kind-hearted. He took off his coat and threw it to Shea. He smiled and said, "Damn, quickly put it on and cover that thing in your pants. We'll wait outside. Quickly come out and leave." As he spoke, he looked at the unconscious girl on the ground. He frowned and said, "Sigh, you're so young. You don't know how to have tender feelings for the fairer sex." He touched his clothes and took out a bag. He took out a gold cake and threw it on the bed. Then he went over and pulled Roar out of the room. Shea held his head in a daze for a while. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Looking at this scene, the girl on the ground was naked, and he was also naked. Even if an idiot saw this scene, he would also insist that he had tainted the girl. But he clearly couldn't remember the process of doing that with this girl. He put on Green's coat and casually swiped the bedsheet. He grabbed the fire fork that was scattered at the head of the bed. Suddenly his eyes flashed. On the snow-white bedsheet, he could vaguely see a few bright red spots. Against the snow-white bedsheet, it was like peach blossoms in full bloom. Shea was stunned. He scratched his head hard and said to himself gloomily, "Damn. I heard that a woman's first time will bleed. Could it be that a man's first time will also bleed?" He was not a fool. He knew in his heart that even if it was the girl on the ground who had sex with him last night, it must not have been her first time in such a brothel. Then what the hell? Could it be that this blood was his own? The country bumpkin walked out of the room gloomily. He still had a shameful doubt in his heart. Lao Tzu, did he do it or not? Outside the door, Roar and Green were already anxious from waiting. They pulled Shea out of the door and went downstairs. When they arrived downstairs, they met the woman who had received the three of them earlier. Green saw that the other party was waiting downstairs and understood. He took out a few gold coins and stuffed them into the other party's hand. Then he waved his hand and pulled Shea and Roar to leave. Probably because they had messed around enough for the night, the two old men sent the country bumpkin back and went their separate ways. Shea returned to the room to rest. Although he had slept, he was still drunk. With a head full of questions, he covered his head and slept again. It was just that this time, the dreams he had were in a mess. This time, the dream was a genuine wet dream. In the dream, he seemed to be hugging a woman, rolling back and forth, making love with her. Then, the country bumpkin vaguely had a familiar feeling in his dream. He wanted to ride a horse, however. At that critical moment, the woman in his arms who was entangled with him in the dream suddenly raised her head. Her face was flushed with love, but her features were clearly that of a pitiful worm. The country bumpkin was so frightened that he immediately retracted his foot. He sat up and sat on the bed, panting. Looking at the light outside the window, the country bumpkin's heart was filled with lingering fear. Damn it! I'm drunk. It must be because Lao Tzu is drunk. Illusion. It's all an illusion. It must be an illusion. Damn it, how can Lao Tzu like men? Just as the country bumpkin was feeling suspicious, a burst of mocking laughter suddenly sounded in his mind. Ha 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 ha, Dora? The country bumpkin's eyes lit up, and he immediately shouted, "You ghost dragon, where have you been these days?" Dora snorted and said disdainfully, "That day you used your power too much and exhausted your spiritual power. Naturally, you couldn't contact me. Well, this magic crystal I'm hiding in is a little strange. That day you found a bigger one. Once I activated it, it seemed like a force wrapped around me." Shea was startled, and then his eyes lit up. "Just right. You must know what's going on around me, you ghost dragon. Tell me what happened last night." Lao Tzu, did Lao Tzu do it or not?" Dora deliberately sneered. "What do you think he did?" "Nonsense." Shea was furious, and then a little embarrassed. Dora's voice sounded like she was trying to hold back her laughter, and her malicious tone made Shea's hair stand. "Humph, of course you did it. Little human, how does it feel to be a virgin?" "Ha ha 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 ha." Shea's heart shook, but for no reason. He felt a sense of emptiness. How can it be fake? Oomph. Do you think I want to see you in that state? But I'm by your side, and I can't hide even if I want to." Shea was silent for a while, and when he raised his head, he frowned. That's terrible. "I heard, if a man and a woman do it, I'm afraid they'll give birth to a baby. Lao Tzu doesn't intend to marry that woman. What if? It would have been better if he didn't say this, but when he said this, Dora in his mind laughed wildly as if she had gone crazy. If it wasn't for the fact that this dragon had already turned into a ghost, even if she were to come back to life, she would have laughed herself to death once again by laughing so wildly. Shea was a little annoyed by her laughter, and he snorted and said angrily, You, what are you laughing at?" In his mind, Dora's voice was out of breath. "Give birth to a baby? Ha ha. You little guy, you're so stupid that it's a little cute. You don't even know this kind of thing?" Finally, sensing that Shea was about to explode in anger, Dora held back her laughter, and said something in Shea's mind. But this sentence made the country bumpkin confused, and he did not know what it meant. "Little country bumpkin, you did the right thing at the beginning, but your movements were too big later, and then you went the wrong way." Went the wrong way? What the hell does this mean? The country bumpkin was very puzzled. There was no time to dwell on these questions. Just as the country bumpkin was puzzled, he suddenly heard a burly voice laughing outside the door. Shea, come out quickly. We're coming." This energetic shout immediately made Shaya's eyes light up. He forgot the messy thoughts in his mind, put on his clothes and rushed out of the door. He immediately saw two people standing at the door of the courtyard. One was as tall as a bull, and the other was thinner, but had a shrewd and cunning smile on his face. Sharba! Ka-tua! Shaya was overjoyed. He rushed over in a few steps and hugged the two people warmly. Then he laughed and punched Sharba and Ka-tua on the chest. Why are you two guys here? Sharba looked at Ka-tua, the smile on his face was a little awkward, and Ka-tua coughed dryly before he said awkwardly, that, the military headquarters gave the order that General Adrik will be transferred to the Imperial Military Headquarters. Our 13th Corps will be led by General Rohr, so Sharba was straightforward and said directly, we thought, if it was Rohr, that fatso, he would only run away, and it would be too depressing to work under him. We discussed for a while and went to find General Adrik. The general said that we should follow him to the capital to find you. Maybe there's a way out? Shaya was happy. The general also came to the capital? Yes, the moment the general entered the city, he was taken away by the people in the palace. His Majesty ordered him to go to the palace immediately, without any delay. Seeing that His Majesty was so anxious, we all thought that General Adrik would be put in an important position by His Majesty this time. When Ka-tua said this, he couldn't help but smile proudly. Country Bumpkin nodded. He already knew that Adrik was put in an important position and Rohr was transferred to the 13th Corps, so he wasn't surprised. But looking at his two former friends from the Personal Guard Battalion, he couldn't help but ask curiously, but why did the general ask you to find me? Sharba shook his head. I don't know. Since the general asked us to find you, there must be a way out, so we came. Shaya was even more surprised. It wasn't strange for Audiobook to ask his former military friends to seek refuge with him. What was strange was that he had just received the reward for his promotion yesterday. How did Audiobook know that there would be a way out for his two subordinates to seek him out? However, he was reunited with his old friends. At that time, they were all brothers who had rolled out from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood on the battlefield together. So, the doubts in his heart were thrown to the side and he excitedly pulled them into the room to chat. The maid was surprised to find that His Highness seemed to be different today. The cold winter had passed and the weather was getting warmer day by day. But today, His Highness suddenly wore a high-collared winter coat. The high fur collar covered his neck tightly. His Highness seemed to be a little restless. Usually, His Highness only liked to sit alone in the room in a daze in front of the window. But today, he seemed to be a little anxious. He walked back and forth in the room several times. Moreover, when he walked, it seemed to be a little inconvenient. It was said that he accidentally slipped on the stairs last night and injured himself. But when the maid said that she wanted to call a doctor, His Highness firmly refused. Adeline naturally did not know that her abnormal behavior was all seen by the maid beside her. She could not help but quietly look at herself in the mirror several times. Damn country bumpkin! It was not obvious last night, but when she looked at it this morning, her neck was full of bruises and strawberry-like marks. The most embarrassing thing for the poor thing was that a certain part of his body was in unbearable pain. Even after a full night's rest, there was no obvious improvement after he got up. This really makes me feel ashamed and embarrassed. The poor thing sighed helplessly. It was not that she had not heard the older maids secretly talk about the matters between men and women in the past. She naturally only knew a little about these things. But she only heard that it would hurt after doing it, but she did not hear that that place would also hurt. The poor thing staggered around the room twice and sat down on the chair in a daze. But as soon as his butt touched the chair, his face suddenly changed. He cried out in pain and jumped up. The maid next to him immediately cast a puzzled look. Go! The poor thing's face turned red. He fiercely cursed someone 100 times in his heart before he whispered with a red face, Go, bring me a softer chair cushion. Too evil, too evil. After writing this chapter, I fiercely despised myself. There are less than 12 hours left. Every time at this time, it's always the author's confession, the words from the bottom of his heart, the 8 immortals crossing the sea, each showing their magical powers. Haha, I'm too lazy to pretend to be bitter or deliberately sad to say anything. Just shout it out. A good man, why do you have to be so coy? The last madness of the monthly votes, the final sprint. There is a song as proof. Open spear and dark sword, let it be, heroic and carefree need not confess. A man's heart is a sword, looking down on the little rascals, my style. Then, let's fight together. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 142. The 138th chapter, Different Paths, Do Not Work Together. When Adric walked into the hall, he did not look sideways. His face was cold and the lines on his face were as if they were carved by a knife. Under the bright red cloak, he wore a set of black iron armor. As he walked, the sound of metal clanging seemed to carry a murderous aura. When he walked up the stairs, the palace warriors in golden armor and holding axes on both sides of the hall seemed to feel the murderous aura of this general. They unconsciously tightened their grip on their axes. Adric frowned. He suddenly turned around and lifted his cloak. He took off the long sword that he wore. The palace servant behind him quickly took it with both hands. Then he said in a low voice, "General, please come in." This domineering general's face was cold and calm. There was no trace of his usual arrogance. He gave a low hum and strode in. The palace servants in linen clothes on both sides saw this general walk in with his head held high. At the same time, they had an illusion in their hearts. It was as if the person walking past them was not a human, but a fierce tiger. The huge and heavy door opened and closed. Adric walked into the room inside. Emperor Cantos was sitting in front of the table. He raised his head slightly and a smile appeared on his slightly sickly face. "You're back?" Adric did not speak. He first knelt down on one knee and performed a meticulous salute. Then he slowly stood up and looked into the Emperor's eyes. "I'm back." Emperor Cantos looked at Adric's face for a while. He could not see any change in Adric's expression. He sighed in his heart and said slowly, "I asked you to hand over the 13th Corps. Were you dissatisfied?" Adric shook his head. The scar on his face trembled slightly. There must be dissatisfaction. Qigong Emperor stood up and slowly walked around the table. He was actually half a head taller than Adric, but he could not hide his sickly appearance. His broad frame seemed to be on the verge of collapsing, and he did not have the valiant aura that Adric had. I can understand. After personally leading the army for so many years, there will be some resentment. Adric shook his head and said seriously, "His Majesty let me lead the army for 9 years. He did not avoid suspicion or suspicion. This is already the greatest trust he has for me. I dare not complain." Emperor Cantos smiled and looked at Audiobook deeply. "It's I don't dare." Adric pursed his lips and remained silent. This time, the silence was even longer than before. Finally, the Emperor said in a low, slightly hoarse voice, "Tell me, Adric, can I trust your loyalty?" Adric seemed to be startled. Without waiting for him to answer, the Emperor continued in a low voice, "Of course you can. I know very well that in this empire, in the army, if even you, Adric, cannot be trusted, then there is no need to talk about loyalty. So, I believe in your loyalty." However, at this point, the Emperor changed the topic. His eyes that were originally somewhat lethargic suddenly revealed some sharpness. "However, Adric, what makes me hesitate is your loyalty. Is it to me or to the Empire?" Adric frowned and pondered for a moment before answering. His Majesty and the Empire, are you not one? No. The Emperor raised his eyebrows and sneered. I am the Emperor. Byzantium is still Byzantium. I am no longer the Emperor. Byzantium is still Byzantium. Those words were like thunder as they came out from the Emperor's mouth. However, they seemed to carry with them an endless amount of pressure. Audric stood there with his head held high. However, he remained silent. Finally, he slowly shook his head and said, I do not understand what your Majesty is saying. I also do not want to understand. I am just a soldier. Do not want to understand. Cantos gave a nimim and stared at him for a long time. Then, he suddenly turned around and walked back to the table. He sat down and looked straight into Audric's eyes. What I want is your do not want to understand. After saying that, the Emperor waved his hand and a piece of paper on the table was tossed over. With a "pa" sound, it landed beside Audric's feet. This. I am handing it over to you. Trust, I am handing it over to you. The Emperor's expression suddenly changed. Word by word, he squeezed out the last sentence from his mouth. It was as though he was roaring in a low voice. He roared, the future of the Empire. I am also giving it to you. Audric bent down and picked up the paper. He slowly opened it and saw the handwriting on it. There were also traces of signatures. His body trembled. He straightened his body and raised his head to look at the Emperor before him. Emperor Cantos appeared to be very tired and weak. It was as though the short burst of emotions earlier had exhausted all of his remaining energy. At this moment, he was half leaning on the chair. His breathing was somewhat rapid and disorderly. Audric, I know very well that your loyalty is not to me. It is to the Empire. Emperor Cantos gasped. His breathing sounded like a broken bellows. It is not that I do not have people who are only loyal to me. However, the funny thing is, these people cannot accomplish anything, but you can. The Emperor pressed his hands on the armrests of the chair and leaned his body forward. They are loyal to me because I am the Emperor. However, the Emperor can no longer be the Emperor. However, you are the Empire. Byzantium will always be Byzantium. Audric's chest was high. The excitement on his face was gradually revealed. Finally, he let out a long sigh. The gaze in his eyes was very complicated. There was gratitude, shock, admiration, and most of all, there was a trace of indescribable reverence. Are you willing? The Emperor stared into Audric's eyes. This matter cannot be handed over to anyone else. Even if I hand it over to you, I am worried that you will not be able to do it well. However, other than you, I have no one else that I can trust. Audric held the paper and slowly raised his right hand. He thumped his chest heavily and answered the Emperor with a solemn tone that he had never used in his life. Even if there is a cliff in front of me, I will still bravely move forward. Your Majesty, this is my oath to you. Emperor Cantos was relieved. He let out a heavy sigh and waved his hand weakly. All right, you may leave. Audric nodded silently and turned to leave. He had only taken 2 steps when the Emperor's low voice came from behind him. This time, the matter of the Senate. Now that you have a heavy responsibility, don't be distracted by other things. Although you are a member of the Senate, I believe that at this moment, you can distinguish what is important and what is not. Audric did not speak. He just paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued to walk out of the room. Behind him, the Emperor's eyes unconsciously revealed a trace of disappointment. Walking out of the main hall, there was a palace warrior next to him who returned his sword. After carefully putting on the sword, Audric walked down the stairs step by step. However, at this moment, his heart seemed to be pressed by a mountain. The appointment letter written by the Emperor himself was in his arms, pressing against his heart. Audric took a few deep breaths, but he could not dispel the pressure at all. He did not lack courage, nor did he lack loyalty. When he saw this appointment letter, The hot-blooded heroism that had cooled down for many years in his heart was reignited. His Majesty has finally made up his mind. But after accepting this appointment letter, he also understood that from the moment he walked out of that door, the road under his feet would be full of open spears and hidden arrows. From now on, even if there was a mountain of knives, a sea of fire, or a high cliff, it would not allow him to shrink back a little. At most, "I'll pay with my life." The domineering general made up his mind, and brought up some of the heroism of a soldier. The trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth seemed to contain a kind of absolute taste. As he walked down the steps, he suddenly saw a figure slowly walking towards him. That figure was dressed in a grey hemp robe and cloth boot. As he walked, there was an indescribable elegance and tranquility. It was as if he was walking in his own garden in this solemn and dignified hall. That faint feeling of transcendence from the surrounding environment leaped up and down. The two of them slowly approached each other, but Auderic did not even look at this person. He wanted to walk away, but when their figures passed each other, that person suddenly seemed to laugh. "General!" Auderic ignored him and continued to walk forward. The person behind him spoke again. This time, there was no trace of anger from being ignored. He smiled and shouted, "General Auderic!" Auderic finally stopped. He frowned and turned to look at this person. His eyes were very cold. "Mr. Cavalier, you should understand that there is no common topic between us." Cavalier stood there and smiled without any anger. His face was old, but his eyes were as calm and gentle as a young woman's. "General! If there is anything you want to say, just say it." Auderic looked coldly at Cavalier. "Those who walk different paths cannot work together. This is what you said back then." Cavalier gently shook his head and smiled. "I have met that child." Audric's eyes suddenly changed. Then, he relaxed. It was as though he did not care at all. "I am not surprised, in no, in the entire empire, in the entire continent, is there anything that you do not know?" Cavalier looked at the other party's eyes. There was an unfathomable smile in his eyes. He said in a low voice, "What I want to tell you is, that child is not bad." Audric's Wu Ran's face changed. His eyes burned with a fiery light as he stared at Cavalier. At this moment, his eyes flashed with killing intent. "Cavalier! This general was like a tiger baring its fangs. That person, you better not touch him. That is my bottom line. Otherwise, humph!" The murderous aura enveloped him like a landslide, but Cavalier's expression was still as calm as ever. Even his eyes didn't waver in the slightest as he allowed the other party's anger to erupt. Audric's face was filled with rage. He turned around and walked away. After taking a few steps, Cavalier suddenly said, "A few days ago, I sent her to Odin." Audric's body stiffened. This time, he did not stop. He strode forward. However, if one were to look closely, they would see that his hands were clenched into fists. His knuckles had turned white, and the other side has invited strong reinforcements. There are other great gods helping to pull votes. It does not matter. We will fight our battles. What do we have to fear? A book friend asked me to get reinforcements. Speaking of which, I have quite a number of friends in the circle. However, I do not want to trouble my friends. Take it on. This is even more exciting. If we win, the joy of victory will be doubled. Let's fight. Fight to the last minute. Cast the monthly votes. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 143. In February, men must persevere. To be able to fight this battle in January, our dance fans are mighty. Our dance fans are mighty. Our country bumpkins are mighty. Here, I bow and thank every brother and sister who supported Lie Nation. This was a very touching month, especially an episode. A group of kind-hearted brothers and sisters pooled together a sum of money to buy subscriptions and monthly votes, or to buy tickets and give out reward. Let me first thank these brothers and sisters. I won't say their names one by one. However, I can't take this money, I have to return it to everyone. It's not that I don't want to accept everyone's kindness, but if I really accept this money, it will burn my hands. When I saw the list of money that everyone pooled together, it was a long list of amounts. Some were high, some were low, some were high, some were low, some were low, some were high, some were low, some were low, some were high, some were low. I knew that this could be the money for surfing the internet, eating breakfast, buying clothes, working. At that time, my eyes were red. I accept the kindness, but I can't accept the money. Apart from that, there were also thousands of people who subscribed, voted, and supported me. Even if there were no monthly votes, they spread the news and encouraged me. I accept everyone's support with shame. If it wasn't for everyone's support, every single one of you. If it wasn't for these, my dancing so-called Great God and Platinum titles would all be bullshit. In 2008, I said, I'm not Chidian's best writer for dancing, far from it, I won't even stand a chance. However, in my heart, you are Chidian's best readers. Now, today, I still say the same thing. At this moment, I want to write more, I want to say more, I want to use flowery words to express the excitement and gratitude in my heart to everyone, but I really don't have the word. It's funny, right? As a writer, I don't even know how to write words of thanks. Because, at this moment, my heart is in chaos. It's not the chaos of distress, it's the chaos of happiness. In February, I will do my best to write more words and write more stories for everyone to read. I won't promise to write more, but please believe me, if I have the ability to write more, even if it's just one more word, I won't be lazy. This is my promise to all of you. Otherwise, I'll be letting down everyone's support. Finally, on the first day of the month, everyone, let's throw in the guaranteed monthly vote. First, we'll collect the guaranteed monthly votes, then we'll continue to work hard this month. Let's not boast about fighting for a certain rank. Everyone supports me with the greatest enthusiasm, and I will work hard to repay you with the greatest enthusiasm. Everyone, a month has passed, and the newbie novel Hunting Nation has just taken off. How far and how high it can fly depends entirely on everyone's support. Every single one of your monthly votes is the driving force that pushes this book forward. So, without further ado, everyone, please watch me dance. I will continue to dance with words for you. Success? We just got started, alright? That's all I have to say. Send in the guaranteed monthly votes. I'll go down now and continue writing. Finally, they shouted, mighty dance fans. The dancers were mighty. Mighty country bumpkins. It was 5:20 a.m. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 144. On the next day, Adrik, the general of the 13th Cavalry Regiment, was transferred to the Imperial Military Headquarters as the Deputy Minister of Military Affairs and transferred to the Senate. This action of Emperor Canto's immediately caused a commotion in the circle of nobles in the imperial capital. Many sensitive people began to speculate what the Emperor Canto's intention was for doing so. When the empire was founded, it was clearly stated in the laws that the emperor's appointment of a minister or deputy minister of the empire had to be approved by the Senate. Only after the approval of the Senate would the appointment be reported to the head of the appointed department for signing. In fact, such a process had existed in name a long time ago. The decline of the Council of Elders lasted for hundreds of years from the beginning of the Imperium to the middle of the Imperium. During that period, countless politicians and leaders of the Council of Elders, who advocated democracy to limit the imperial power, had many fierce conflicts with the royal family. However, because of the system of democracy to limit the imperial power, there was an irreparable congenital defect at the earliest establishment. The Council of Elders did not hold any actual power itself. As a result, once the imperial power was concentrated, the Council of Elders became a decoration that could only be discussed and talked about. It could be said that when the empire was first established, the idea of the Senate was good. However, the defects in the system made it a deformed so-called democracy. Once the emperor held the military and political power in his hands, it was fine if he met a person with a dark and weak personality. The Senate would occasionally have the opportunity to speak up. However, once an emperor with a strong personality and a strong desire for power was encountered, then the Senate might really become a place for empty talk. Therefore, about 200 years ago, an emperor of the empire did it more thoroughly. At that time, the emperor directly passed an imperial decree. The emperor had the power to issue special appointments, and as long as this appointment was approved by the Parliament of Nobles, it could directly replace the Senate's deliberation process and be handed over to the head of the appointed department for signing. The so-called Parliament of Nobles was actually a group of nobles that closely surrounded the imperial family. The imperial family was the largest noble in the empire, and all the other nobles, whether in terms of class or the general direction of common interests, were supposed to advance and retreat with the imperial family. In the end, most of the members of the Parliament of Nobles were members of the imperial family or the imperial family's in-laws. In this way, at least in the level of personnel appointment, there was almost no restriction on the imperial power. This time, what surprised the different circles of nobles in the imperial capital was that the Qigong emperor actually sent a personnel appointment letter to the Senate. Senate? Everybody knew that the Council of Elders had long abandoned the personnel appointment system in the past 200 years. After more than 200 years, not just a military minister, even the Council of Elders was not qualified to say anything about the appointment of a minor official in a desolate department. What was the emperor trying to do? Could it be that Emperor Kantos drank himself to death before signing the appointment letter? Or was the Qigong emperor muddle-headed? What did he want to do with the Senate? These were just guesses. The one who did not know whether to laugh or cry the most was the Senate itself. The Senate had not held personnel appointments for 200 years. It was said that when the messenger from the imperial court delivered the official document signed by His Majesty to the Senate, the person guarding the Senate suddenly saw the messenger wearing a brocade robe and did not recognize the other party's attire. The Senate had not received a messenger from the imperial court for many years. The arrival of the emissary from the royal palace immediately threw the Council of Elders, which was usually deserted, into chaos. Several executive senators who were in the Council of Elders at that time hurriedly rummaged through their chests and cupboards for bright clothes. Then, they quarreled for more than half an hour over the etiquette of welcoming the emissary from the royal palace into the Council of Elders. This was the first time in more than 200 years that something like this had happened. In the end, they searched through several documents and found a few cases from hundreds of years ago. By the time the elders walked out of the courtyard to welcome him, the imperial envoy was already standing under the sun with a face full of impatience. However, the elders were still standing at the door with their heads held high and their chests puffed out. From the looks of it, even if he bumped into them, the other party wouldn't give way at all. What was the meaning of this? The messenger from the imperial palace was a little unhappy. He coughed and said, "I brought the appointment letter signed by His Majesty. Please raise the Senate." The first senator standing in the middle suddenly roared. His voice almost frightened the palace messenger. "Your Majesty, do you know that civil rights come from the people's livelihood?" The messenger's face twitched. He suddenly remembered that His Majesty's strict order seemed to have mentioned this scene in front of him. He could only shrink his head and said, "His Majesty knows." "Very good." The first Grand Elder nodded in satisfaction and stepped aside with a reserved smile on his face. The second senator was still standing there. He suddenly shouted in a loud voice, "Does your Majesty know that the power of a ruler comes from the people?" The messenger clenched his teeth and endured the numbness in his ears. "His Majesty knows." "That's right." The second senator stepped aside. As for the third elder, he seemed to be so old that all his teeth had fallen out. Although his silk robe looked bright and fresh, if one were to take a closer look, they would see that it was full of holes and had a faint moldy smell. It was unknown if he had just dug it out from the bottom of a treasure chest. This old man seemed to be unable to stand. He could barely breathe. The messenger from the imperial palace was a little worried. He was afraid that this old man would not be able to breathe and would be summoned by His Majesty at any time. "Does your Majesty know of the people's plans?" That shriveled and leaky mouth barely managed to spit out these few words in a trembling voice, but it made people hear it vaguely. The messenger felt helpless in his heart. This old fellow, he was probably buried to the top of his head. What was he doing out here? However, he did not care what the other party was mumbling. Before he came, His Majesty had told him that the entrance ceremony was an ancient ceremony. He did not care too much. If there was a problem, he could just say, "His Majesty knows." The old man nodded and was about to reply, "That's right." However, the emissary was already extremely impatient. He was one step ahead of him and squeezed through the gaps between the people. After entering, he directly handed the document he brought to the first senator with both hands. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. "The document His Majesty wrote has been handed over. If there is a need for discussion, please make a decision as soon as possible. I will go back and report." After he finished speaking, he saw the three elders standing in a row as if they were going to carry out some ancient ceremony. The messenger was a little impatient and quickly left. Seeing that the messenger had left, the three senators also heaved a sigh of relief. The oldest one could no longer stand. Two attendants quickly came up to support him. One of the senators opened the document and took a look. General Adric, appointed as the Vice Minister of Military Affairs of the Empire? The other two were also stunned. Even the old man seemed to have stopped gasping for breath and stopped bending over. He stared at his two colleagues in shock. After a long time, the three of them were suddenly overjoyed. "Victory! Victory! Quick! Send out the order! Gather all the members of the Senate. It must be sent to everyone today. Victory! The Emperor has handed over such an important appointment to the Senate for discussion. That is a great victory for democracy and civil rights over imperial power." The three of them had an infatuated look on their faces. After laughing wildly for a while, the one standing in the middle sighed thoughtfully. "Sigh. With this as a foundation, next month's funds should be distributed earlier. Well, I've been eating cabbage every day these days. I'm a little sick of it. Now we can have meat to eat, right?" When the other two senators heard this, their faces immediately showed an empathetic expression. For a moment they were in high spirits. Even the oldest one was dancing with joy. One of the senators could be heard chanting, "Meat, eat meat." The three normally respected senators were behaving like this. The few young servants at the side could not help but be at a loss. These young servants didn't have much education, so they naturally didn't know anything about democracy and civil rights. But looking at the appearance of the three masters, they didn't know anything. This democracy, is it eating meat? The appointment and removal of personnel, which was only held once every 200 years, immediately caused a sensation in the capital. After the summons was issued, there were a total of 163 members registered in the Senate who had the right to make decisions. But after the summons, it was discovered that the number of members was greatly different. It turned out that since the Senate had declined, it usually maintained only 30 or so standing members to carry out their daily work. The so-called work was that some of the capital's social celebrities would regularly gather in the Senate to criticize the current political and national policies under the pretext of restricting imperial power and implementing democracy. To put it bluntly, it was just grumbling and empty talk. There were quite a few of them, such as "What should I do if I were the Prime Minister? What should I do if I were the Minister of Military Affairs? How should I restructure the system if I were the Chief Justice of the Empire?" Among them, there were very few capable people. Most of them were full of grumbling but arrogant fools. As the saying goes, people walk to higher places while water flows to lower places. The Senate had declined for so many years. Without power and influence, how could it retain the real talents? But there was always a benefit to these people's regular gatherings. There were some social celebrities who liked to pretend to be cultured and cared about national affairs and the people's livelihood. They were just second- or third-rate figures. As for the real first-class core level, it was impossible for them to enter. They could only make empty talk here and sigh that their talents were not recognized. It was just that although these people were only second- or third-rate, there were always some who were quite wealthy. There were even some who had a noble title above their head. These people often gathered once, and every time, there would be a donation drive. The funds raised were used to maintain the Senate's daily operations. Apart from that, the Senate, in order to show its democratic and civil rights, also sent the membership with the right to make decisions to the common people. Outstanding people from all walks of life, profound scholars, celebrities, and so on. Of course, such a scene could only be seen more than 200 years ago, and it was no longer seen today. Today's Senate had long become deserted. Even the members of the Senate's resolutions could not be sent out sometimes. Why? These resolutions were useless on normal days. In this huge Senate, how could there be any **T matters that could be decided? But this resolution membership required a membership fee every year. Who would be willing to do it? Therefore, in the end, the membership was reduced again and again until it could not be reduced anymore. But there were still good and bad people mixed together. And if it was really reduced, it would be difficult to raise it again. Therefore, this time, when the summons was issued, the capital was in an uproar. But in the evening, when the sky was dark, the more than 100 members on the roster had not been counted. There were even servants in the Senate who hurried back to report. A certain member had passed away many years ago. A certain member had moved away with his family. A certain member had converted to the church and served God for the rest of his life. He did not care about worldly matters. In the end, excluding those who had died of old age, illness, or had disappeared without a trace, or had jumped out of the secular world, the final tally of this group of members who were still in the capital, who were alive and breathing, who could walk and who had no problem in their minds, was actually only 88. The three senators looked at each other and looked very helpless. Then, forget it. 88, then so be it. It was better than nothing. Then, they sent someone to send an invitation jointly signed by the three senators in the Senate. They sent someone to send it to the residence of General Adric in the capital and arranged for a meeting to be held the next day. Early the next morning, the three senators were so excited that they could not sleep for the whole night. They had encountered a grand event that they had not encountered for more than 200 years. If His Majesty the Emperor really had a string in his head that was wrong, then they prayed for God's blessing that this string would be more wrong in the future. And when they thought of their position as senators in the Senate, they had experienced something that had not happened for 200 years. In the future, they would have their own mark in the history books. But excitement aside, when the three senators waited for the members who had come to participate in the meeting according to the summons in the morning, the three guys were stunned at the same time. This was the F***king members of the Sacred Senate who had the sacred right to pass resolutions? Standing on the steps of the Senate, the three senators were dumbfounded at the same time. At the main entrance of the Senate, an ox cart was blocking the steps of the main entrance. The ox cart was deeply stuck in a pit on the road. The coachman, who was originally sitting on it with his legs crooked, had now jumped down. He pulled the ox's head with all his strength, and the ox started to moo. At the same time, there was a crowd of people gathered around the door. As soon as the Senate opened the door, these people immediately swarmed over. "Open the door, open the door! Quick, quick, quick! Wait, wait!" Among the 3 senators, the younger one was frightened and hurriedly ordered the servants. "Block the door, block it! Everyone outside, report your name and occupation." A young woman wearing a small cloth jacket with a child in her arms said, "My husband is a blacksmith. My husband has work to do today, so he asked me to come. I don't have a name." A man reeking of blood, wearing greasy clothes and a fierce-looking face, with a boning knife at his waist, said, "Lao Tzu is a butcher." A middle-aged man with a roll-up sleeve and hands full of dirt said, "I am a gardener." A thin and short young man glared at him. "My father is dead, so I am here on his behalf." Finally, a young man with a pale face with a hint of green. Even under the sunlight, he had a feminine and ghostly appearance. I am. At that moment, the hearts of the 3 senators had turned cold. Hearing the stammering of the last person, one of the senators could not help but frown impatiently and shouted, "What do you do?" The pale and feminine man suddenly hesitated. I am a Halls." Before the 3 senators could understand, the butcher from earlier suddenly laughed and pointed at the man. "Ah, so it is a rabbit." At this moment, the 3 grand elders probably even had thoughts of dying. The dignified Senate, the symbol of civil rights since the founding of the empire, had fallen to such a state? What common father's pawn? Forget about that. But even a damned rabbit from the hall had become a member of the Senate? The 3 senators looked at each other. Finally, the one in the middle coughed and frowned. "Stop arguing. This was too outrageous. Where did you guys get your memberships from?" According to the rules of the Senate, those who can obtain membership must have a certain level of education. Look at you people." The senator stomped his foot and snorted. "Stop arguing. Listen to me. Who among you can read? Who can recognize the Byzantium characters? Who can read and write? Come up first." But after asking the same question 3 times, he saw the people below looking at each other in dismay. You look at me, I look at him, but no one really took a step forward. The senator was filled with grief and indignation. Just as he was about to sigh, the pale and feminine man timidly raised his hand. The senator was overjoyed. Sure enough, there was someone who could read. No matter what, it was better than nothing. However, when the effeminate man continued speaking, the words he said were, although I can't read, I can count. Counting from 1 to 100 is not a problem." Counting from 1 to 100? If not for the fact that the senator's mind was somewhat strong, he might have really killed himself on the steps. Among the elites of the Senate, there were historians, researchers, inventors, politicians, strategists, and quite a few artists, but now, a guy who could only count from 1 to 100 had actually become the most educated member of the Senate. If the seniors of the past knew about this, they would probably jump out of their graves in anger. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but feel sad. That trace of excitement and anticipation had long been swept clean. The senator's face was full of anger. Counting from 1 to 100? Humph, to think that you can count to 100! He was being sarcastic, but he didn't expect that the pale and feminine man didn't feel it at all. That's right. I can usually do 4 business a day. After a day, I can earn 100 copper coins. The senator sneered. Oh, so every time you do business, you can earn 25 copper coins? The pale and feminine man suddenly had a face full of surprise. Old mister, how did you know? Yes. Could it be that you've also been to my place? but why don't I have any impression of you? Poochie. Blood spurted out. Lord Senator. Lord Senator. Someone come. Lord Senator. I'm not feeling well today, so I wrote 5,000 words. Tomorrow I'll make up for it. I mean what I said. As for why I wrote 5,000, not 4,000, not 6,000? Because Chidian's full attendance award requires 5,000 a day. There's a bonus of 500 at the end of the month. I'm preparing to use it for activities. That's it. By the way, I'd like to notify all the dance fans and country bumpkins to please pass this message to each other. Everyone, please wait and line up to hand in your guaranteed monthly votes. Someone said that if the monthly votes reach a certain number, he'll run around naked. Everyone, line up to vote and wait to see him run around naked. _. I'm too evil. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com to read more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 145. Author's Note. 7,000 words in advance. There will be an update tonight. The 140th chapter, True Love. The controversy caused by the Qigong Emperor's strange actions did not affect the country bumpkin at all. In the next 2 days, the country bumpkin was busy with the paperwork for his title. The aristocratic council had already sent someone to contact Shea and ask him to submit his background. The poor country bumpkin was simply a lone star. He did not even know who his mother Lao Tzu was, so how could he report it? In the end, after some discussion, they asked Roar and the others to help make up a document. They even made up 8 generations of uncles and aunts. In the end, when the country bumpkin received the document that Roar and the others had painstakingly made up, he could not help but be stunned. After looking at Roar for a long time, he sighed. To be honest, Fatso, I will have to be careful around you in the future. You really can lie without batting an eyelid. Lao Tzu saw this for himself, and almost believed what was written on it. Roar was so angry that he almost kicked the country bumpkin. He scolded. I put aside my official duties and stayed up all night to make this for you. Every word of thanks and so much nonsense. If you don't want it, give it back to me. But how could Shea be willing? He put it away with a smile. Okay, I owe you one. After that, he sent someone to hand this document over to the aristocratic council. The next thing to do was to verify the documents and the like. Roar said that if the emperor wanted to promote a country bumpkin like Shea, the aristocratic council would not obstruct him. This verification was just a formality. The next day, Shea went to see General Adric, who had already arrived at the capital. At this time, the news of this general's appointment had already spread throughout the imperial capital. Although Shea didn't quite understand what kind of official this deputy minister of military affairs was, but looking at this scene, it seems that he must be a big shot. When they met, General Adric's expression was calm, as if he did not have the slightest joy of being promoted. Instead, his expression became more serious. When he met Shea, this general with a scar on his face gave Shea some words of encouragement and did not say anything else. But Shea instinctively felt that although the general's attitude did not change much, there were some details in his behavior that were strange. Adric seemed to be in a daze a few times when he was talking. Every time he was in a daze, although it was only for a short time, he would involuntarily stare at Shea with a slightly strange look in his eyes. Shea knew that when he was arrested by the military, if it wasn't for General Adric's help, things would not have turned out this way. He was a country bumpkin who clearly distinguished between kindness and hatred. If someone treated him well, he would be sincerely grateful. Therefore, when he met Adric, he was especially respectful to this general who had helped him. There was no trace of his usual smile. After talking for a while, Adric suddenly said, Katua and Sharba, they are good men who have followed me for many years. I know that you have a good relationship with them, and there is also Kevin. Speaking of the bald man who died in battle, Adric's expression became somewhat desolate. Following which, this strong-willed general shook his head and said, "Let's not talk about this anymore. When soldiers go to war, dying on the battlefield is a common thing. You and I don't have to be so obsessed with this kind of emotion. Katua and Sharba do not want to stay in the 13th Cavalry Regiment anymore." These two brats were worried that Ruhr would not be able to lead the 13th Corps well, so they came to me and begged to leave with me. But I did not agree. Why? Shea was a bit puzzled. Didn't you get promoted? In his opinion, General Adric was very good to his subordinates. If they could still follow him, the Deputy Minister of Military Affairs, after being promoted to the military, it would be a great job. And the general's character was definitely not that kind of person who would not care about old relationships after being promoted. But he refused to follow his two old subordinates. If they follow me into the military, their future may not be good. After thinking about all kinds of things, I am afraid that they will not be as free and happy as staying in the barrack. So, I brought them to the imperial capital and let them follow you. In your place, you are all brothers who have fought together in the sea of blood. I believe that you will not mistreat your old friends. Seeing that the general did not want to elaborate, Shea simply did not ask. Anyway, Katua and Sharbo were his brothers. No matter what, he would always treat them well. But the general's attitude made Shea feel somewhat uneasy. Although the general had always been dignified and serious, but why did it sound like he was saying his last words this time? After a moment of silence, Adric looked at Shea. His eyes were originally resolute, but at some point, they inadvertently revealed a trace of gentleness. But this expression was fleeting, and very quickly turned into his usual sternness. Tomorrow, I will go to the Senate to accept the process of appointment. Shea, come with me. The Senate was set up at the beginning of the Empire. It is of great significance. You should also go and experience it. It will be of some help to your future. Shea did not ask more and immediately agreed. He respected the general very much. Since the general asked him to do something, it must be for his own good. The next morning, Shea followed General Adric to the Senate to accept the appointment. This time, Adric returned to the capital with only a dozen personal guards. According to tradition, when going to the Senate, they had to change into a white robe and not wear any official uniform that showed their status. This was the embodiment of the spirit of democracy. Everyone was equal. But Shea knew, and there was some disdain in his heart. If everyone wore the same clothes, then everyone was equal? It was just a fig leaf that was pulled off. Outside the Senate, the high-ranking officials and the common people were ants. How could they be the same? But it seemed that Adric's attitude towards the Senate was very respectful. Since the general wanted to do this, Shea naturally did not say a word and did as he was told. But when he saw General Adric take off his armor and military uniform and put on a white linen robe, there was a trace of a sacred expression on his originally murderous face. This made Shea feel a little sad. The young country bumpkin did not know what belief and ideal were at this moment. But, from the general, he instinctively felt a little different experience. It seemed that these were things that the general valued very much in his heart. The group of people were all dressed in white and rode to the Senate. When they were dozens of meters away from the door, the general took the lead to dismount and led the horse to walk. Adric walked in front and turned back to smile at the puzzled Shea. He said warmly, "It is a tradition from 1,000 years ago. Before the Senate, no matter whether it is the noble or the royal family, they are not allowed to ride their horses as a show of respect for civil right." Shea was at a loss, but he could only do as he was told. He did not know anything about civil rights. He only knew that whatever the general told him to do, he would do it. When he arrived at the entrance of the Senate building, he looked at the mottled stone steps and the rusty door. Although it had been temporarily renovated, it was hard to hide the rust that had accumulated over the years. Even though it was deliberately made to look solemn, it still couldn't hide the dilapidated feeling within. There was no one at the door and the door was wide open. Shea was puzzled, but he heard Adrik laugh. This is a tradition. Those who are invited, no matter their status or nobility, will be dressed in white when they enter this door. If there is a line at the door to welcome them, then there is a distinction between nobility and lowly. It cannot be called equality. Shea disagreed in his heart and just nodded. This was his first time coming to the Senate. This place was very famous in the history of the empire. However, in the imperial capital, it was not eye-catching. They walked in and passed through a winding corridor. The floor, walls and ceiling on both sides of the corridor were all broken. There were also some weeds growing stubbornly in some of the cracks. In the innermost area was a circular area that resembled a small theater. Adrik told Shea that this was the Senate's meeting room. When the empire was first established, this was where the most important document of the empire was passed, the empire's code of law. Looking at General Adrik's face, there was a faint look of excitement on his face. His eyebrows were stern, like a fanatical pilgrim on a pilgrimage. Shea understood. The general was not happy because he was about to be promoted here. It was as though, for some unknown reason, he placed great importance on this Senate. This circular small meeting room was surrounded by a circular platform. Looking at the environment, it was enough to accommodate hundreds of people. However, on the empty platform, there were only 100 or so people sitting in the front row. Everyone was dressed in white robes and seemed a little cold and cheerless. In the middle of the circular platform, there were 3 white-robed old men on it. Naturally, they were the 3 chief senators of the Senate. Different from the other people in the room, these 3 senators, in addition to their white robes, had an olive leaf-shaped golden badge pinned on their chest. Adrik repeatedly told Shea to find a seat next to the steps to sit down and listen, and not to make a racket, and then strode up to the high platform. The moment he went up, the white-robed members sitting around him exclaimed in surprise. "Ah, this is the general? Why does he look so scary? God, look at his scarred face. TSK, what do you know? Only with a scary appearance can you frighten the enemy on the battlefield. Do you think he's one of those pretty boys doing business in your business? What general? It's military affairs. What's that official's name again? Right, what about the Vice Minister of Military Affairs? I heard that he's a very, very high-ranking official. Even the Emperor has to be polite to him. What do you think he's going to say to us later? What's the meaning of this proposal? Do we have to ask him something? Don't talk nonsense, let's listen to what he has to say. Alas, I still have work to do at home. Those 3 old men said that if we sit here for half a day, they'll give us 10 copper coins. I wonder if it's true. The whispers below were like hundreds of flies buzzing. When Shea heard this, his heart was filled with dissatisfaction. He couldn't help but frown. His expression was ugly, and he glared fiercely at the people beside him. When they saw Shea's fierce expression, they moved their butts away in fear and sat further away. On the stage, Adrik also heard the clamor below. However, he didn't hear it clearly. His originally passionate eyes dimmed slightly, and he only frowned. However, when he saw the 3 senators work together to lift a thin, square stone slab and place it on a table in the middle of the stage, Adrik's eyes immediately filled with excitement. The stone slab had been there for an unknown number of years. It was already slightly black, but the words carved on it were still clear. The power of a ruler comes from the people. This item seemed to ignite the passion in Adrik's heart. He forgot about the clamor below and walked directly to the table. He stood there and nodded to the 3 senators. Silence! Silence! One of the senators shouted, "Now, General Adrik, please accept the proposal. It wasn't clear whether it was because of the senator's prestige or the promised 10 copper coins, but the people below quickly shut their mouths. Adrik's expression was stern. He walked up and coughed slightly before speaking in a deep voice. In this round meeting hall, the general's words were clearly heard. Everyone already knows my name. Today, I am here to accept the proposal because all power comes from the people. Today, I am standing here to accept the proposal from the people. This is the spirit. Adrik looked at the people below and the 3 senators beside him. They all had gratified expressions. They were naturally happy. The proposal this time was actually to review such an illustrious appointment as the Deputy Minister of Military Affairs. That was fine. The key point was that Adrik's political position was originally close to the Senate. He was also an honorary member of the Senate. Such an important person who valued the spirit of civil rights was about to enter the core circle of the empire's power. Then, in the future, if he could open up more eyes for the Senate, then. Adrik seemed to finally be a little excited. His voice became more passionate. When the empire was founded, a great philosopher once said, "Whether it is the sacred, the supreme, or the lowly, crawling like ants, all of these come from the people. If the people support it, then there is the supreme. If the people don't like it, then the supreme will eventually become lowly." Adrik's speech started with a quote from the founding of the Senate. The great philosopher of the empire, who was also one of the earliest founders of the Senate, quoted a famous quote from a work written by this ancestor. When the 3 elders heard these words, their eyebrows were raised in exultation, and Audiobook himself had an awe-inspiring expression on his face. However, after he spoke for a few minutes, the members below gradually showed an impatient expression. At this moment, not to mention the prestige of the senators, even the effect of the 10 copper coins seemed to have decreased by a lot. "What do you think he was talking about up there?" "How would I know? What do you mean by the crawling ants?" "Tisk, ants all crawl." "What is crawling? Is it a toad?" He said something about the people not liking it, then the supreme will become an ant? What does that mean?" "You ask me, how would I know? Lao Tzu doesn't like that tax official's face every day when he comes to collect taxes. He wants to be rich even in his dreams. But so what if I don't like it? I don't dare to provoke that tax official." "Shut up. Do you still want the 10 copper coins?" The discussion below gradually became louder. On the stage, Adrik didn't seem to have any reaction. He continued to speak with assurance. However, his eyebrows unconsciously furrowed a few times. His originally passionate eyes couldn't help but reveal a trace of disappointment. Finally, his speech ended. The 10-minute speech made the members below yawn repeatedly. There were even some who sat there and couldn't sit still anymore. There was nothing to do on the steps. It was just hard stones. After sitting for a long time, their buttocks felt uncomfortable. They couldn't help but move around. There were also some who seemed to be used to the way things were at home. They crossed their legs and propped them up on the steps, half lying there. There were also some who went even further. They were chatting in low voices, talking about domestic trivialities, the price of meat and vegetables and so on. After Adrik finished speaking, his expression gradually became more and more disappointed. He slowly turned his head and glanced at Elder Yuan. Silence. Elder Yuan's face was somewhat red. He braced himself and shouted loudly, "Next, let's begin the discussion. Mr. Adrik, please accept everyone's questions." Questions? The people below immediately became spirited. Before this discussion, the 3 elders had already done a lot of emergency training for these members. This discussion was actually a process of accepting all kinds of questions from everyone and answering them on the spot. No matter how difficult it was or how sharp the questions were, the person being discussed had to answer them. In the ancient tradition, in the early years of the Senate, there would often be some influential people who couldn't satisfy the members during the discussion. In the end, they would end up in a sorry state. This kind of matter piqued everyone's interest. This was a rare opportunity. They could casually make things difficult for these people who were usually high and mighty, and they didn't need to be punished? Seeing such a big figure, such a big official being down on his luck, seeing such a person being put into a sorry state by small people like them, this was a good opportunity. No matter what, even if it was just a show, it would be something to be proud of in the future. It would be a good topic to talk about after a meal. Sure enough, once Elder Yuan opened his mouth to announce the question, there was a buzz from below. Everyone scrambled to be first and some noise began. General, why don't you tell us why the war tax is increased every year? That's right. I live in Ostjilla. What does the war in other places have to do with me? There are always people coming to my shop to cause trouble. Those patrol teams have connections with those hoodlums. How evil! They pay the security tax but no one cares. Too evil. Corrupt officials. My nephew was beaten up last year. It was those people from the security team. How much does a big shot like you earn every year? Why are you still exploiting us lowly citizens? Nonsense. It would be strange if this kind of aristocrat wasn't greedy for money. Ha! Look at how red his face is. He is so guilty that he can't say anything. Rejected. Rejected. One of the people shouted out loudly, reminding the people beside him. Last night, when the three old men were teaching everyone the process, didn't they say that at the end of the discussion, they could choose to pass or reject? Most of them did not pay much attention to the process of passing. However, to reject, that would be a good thing. Normally, when meeting such a big shot, they would have to lower their heads in respect. To have the opportunity to make such a person suffer in our hands, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. That's right. That's it. Rejected. Rejected. Seeing such a big shot being down on his luck, how fun would that be? Rejected. 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 The buzzing noise filled the room. Adrik, who was on top, did not even say a single word. Among the so-called questions below, not a single one of them had seriously asked him a single question regarding his promotion. Shea was so angry that his face turned red. There were a few times when he wanted to stand up. However, Adrik gave him a stern look, stopping Shea from doing so. The young Shea could not understand. The general was such a good person, a good general who wholeheartedly served the country, killing enemies and resisting foreign invaders. He had never done anything bad. Why would these bastards do such a thing to such a good person? Why would the general be so polite to them? Rejected. Rejected. Oh. Rejected. Rejected. Yes. We will not let these aristocrats be complacent. Rejected. Rejected. Ha 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 ha. Rejected. The three elders on top were red in the face and they looked at each other. They naturally understood Adrik's character. They also knew that Adrik, a high-ranking official who was close to the Senate, was of great benefit to the Senate. However, Adrik stood on top of the stage with a cold face. His eyes were filled with disappointment. He did not seem to care about the ridicule and jeering from below. That's right, it was purely meaningless jeering. But this general, his face was like this. What was his heart like? No matter what, at this moment, Shea looked here, looked at this place, looked at these fellows in white robe. His heart was filled with anger and hostility. General, I don't understand what you're talking about civil rights and democracy. But, is this what you mean by democracy? At this moment, Shea's heart was filled with disdain for the Senate's proposal. At the end of the quiet long street in the north of the city, passing through buildings and courtyards, in the innermost circular study, Cavashir quietly leaned on a soft couch. One of his legs was crossed, and his foot was covered with snow-white socks. He held a book in his hand and flipped through it. As if he had seen something interesting, his foot covered with white socks trembled slightly. Beside him, The girl with freckles on her face was standing with her hands by her side. She whispered, "That's about it. Teacher, today General Adrik's proposal in the Senate was rejected." "I just got the news, I think." Pa Cavasher smiled gently and put down the book in his hand. He looked at his female disciple and said in his gentle voice, "Well, I already knew." Then, he stretched out his hand. The girl immediately went over and respectfully helped her teacher sit up. Cavasher sat up straight and stretched. "I already guessed this result. Democracy, a bunch of people who don't even know how to read and don't even have enough to eat, how would they understand these things? If the people's wisdom is not open, then there's no way to talk about democracy." "Ridiculous," he said lightly. "I understand this, and so does His Majesty." However, His Majesty deliberately made such a move this time and threw Adrik's appointment to the Senate. His intention is very obvious. He wants Adrik to see how bad the Senate is now. He wants Adrik to give up on the Senate system. He wants to be loyal to His Majesty in the future. He wants to use this to let Adrik see these things clearly and destroy the hope in his heart. The girl sighed. His Majesty's intentions are indeed extraordinary. This disciple did not think of this. Cavasher looked at his female disciple and smiled. "Unfortunately, His Majesty's intentions are in vain." "Oh!" The girl raised her head and looked at her teacher with a puzzled expression. "I know Adrik's character very well." Cavasher shook his head and pointed at the teacup on the table. The girl quickly went over and held it with both hands. Cavasher accepted it and took a sip. He raised his head and looked at the girl. "Let me ask you, if you love someone and the person you love suddenly becomes ugly and sick, what would you do?" The girl was stunned. However, since her teacher had asked her, she replied respectfully, "That depends on whether it is true love or fake happiness. If it is just fake happiness, I will naturally have a change of heart and will no longer care about that person. If it is true love, I will do my best to cure that person's illness. I will not give up just because of that person's illness." Hearing that, Cavasher gave a long sigh. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "That is it." He looked at his female disciple and said, "Adrik's belief in his heart is true love." Hearing that, the girl's face turned thoughtful. After a while, she gave a soft sigh. Then, she suddenly recalled something and said, "Teacher, there is one more thing. You asked me to pay attention to that kid's movements. Today, I heard that General Adrik brought that kid with him to the Senate. However, when they left, that kid flew into a rage and started talking nonsense in front of the Senate." "Oh!" Hearing that, Cavasher's eyes suddenly lit up and a happy smile appeared on his face. He stood up and walked to the table. Then, he suddenly raised his hand and gently patted the table. "Ha ha ha! Very good, very good. Adrik brought him there most likely because he wanted that kid to believe in that belief. However, he overreached himself this time. Very good, very good. That kid will probably never have a good impression of the Senate in the future. Speaking of which, this is a good news." He looked at the female disciple and suddenly said, "Prepare the car. I am going out." "Teacher, it is already lunchtime. You don't understand," Cavasher said indifferently and strode toward the door of the study. The girl behind him quickly followed. "Speaking of which, these words in the Senate must be written. They must be written. Writing this kind of novel, only writing about adventures and leveling up is easy. However, to create a complete world structure and worldview is considered rigorous. A novel is a picture. The best novel should be like the famous ancient painting along the river during the Qingming festival, which vividly depicts all living things and all kinds of different ecosystems. This should be a virtual world, a complete world structure. Therefore, these things must be written. Moreover, it will have a huge impact on the personal growth of a country bumpkin. Finally, I beg for monthly votes. Seeing that I have put in so much effort, please reward me with monthly votes. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 146. The 141st chapter, Assassination. The melodious sound of the zither was like a clear spring. Each note was like a broken jade bead. Just listening to the sound of the zither was enough to intoxicate one's soul. The wide chair was covered with a pure white soft bear skin. A tall, delicate, and feminine young man was leaning on the chair. His feet were on the bear's head, and one of his hands was propped up on the armrest of the chair. He was holding his face and squinting his eyes, quietly watching the person playing the zither in the room. Not far from him, behind a curtain, the curtain was like a veil with a faint golden edge. The strings between the beads were surprisingly pure gold. Behind the curtain, a delicate and beautiful figure was sitting there. In front of her was a harp. 10 slender fingers were slowly plucking the strings, causing the strings to tremble. The beautiful sound of the zither jumped out like magic. The woman's side was facing the curtain. Her long hair hung down, softly sticking to the side and back of her body. Her hair was actually a rare light purple. Coupled with her black muslin robe, just her side profile alone was enough to give others a strange sense of beauty. The side view of her face had a slightly sharp chin, but the outline of her cheeks was round and full. The bridge of her nose was straight and her skin was like jade. Such a face should be charming and charming, but between her eyebrows, there seemed to be a hint of coldness. If one looked carefully, the corners of her eyes were slightly raised, adding a hint of wildness to her face. What was even more astonishing was that when one looked at her from the side, one could see that her eyes were actually a faint purple color. Only her pupils had a little black in them. Under the black gauze, there was a slender figure with thin shoulders. From the side view, there was a full chest and a slim waist. What was even more attractive was the outline of her full and straight legs under the black gauze, as well as the snow-white bare feet stepping on the soft fox skin. The tall young man listened with a bit of infatuation. Suddenly, he subconsciously stood up. His tall and straight body was not bloated in the slightest. He strode towards the curtain and slowly reached out his hand to lift it. The woman playing the zither didn't react at all. She just continued to play the zither, making it sound even more demonic. The tall young man's eyes flashed with a trace of infatuation. A trace of eagerness gradually appeared on his originally somewhat feminine face. Finally, his footsteps got closer and closer. He reached out a hand, as if he wanted to touch the woman playing the zither. Just as his fingertips were about to touch the woman's face. Ding! The last note of the zither came to an abrupt end. As if his magic had been interrupted, the young man's body suddenly shook, and his face regained its clarity. Looking at his hand that was about to touch the other's cheek, he couldn't help but open his mouth and smile awkwardly. This is the last time. The woman didn't raise her head. She just looked at the strings indifferently. However, her voice was as cold as jade. Your Highness, this is the last time. If there's a next time, I guarantee that your hand won't be on your wrist anymore. When she said those words, the contents of her words were filled with coldness. However, her tone was cold, as if it wasn't such a fierce warning. Instead, it carried a kind of indifference as if nothing had happened. The smile on the man's face became even more awkward. He retracted his hand and placed it behind his back. Harp. Sigh, the sound of your harp, I've been thinking about it for a long time. The way you play. It really does sound like her. The woman finally turned her head around and looked at the man. But after she turned her face around, what was surprising was that only half of her beautiful face was visible. Half of her face was covered by an iron mask. The iron mask went down from the forehead to the nose, covering half of her face, only revealing her eyes. Such a beautiful face, under this iron mask, appeared incomparably strange. This woman was, of course, Wea. Your Highness Cuchulainn, I don't care about what you say. What I said. I hope your Highness will remember. There was no change in Via's eyes. He gently let go of the harp and placed his hands inside his sleeve. Cuchulainn smiled. The awkwardness on his face disappeared, and he appeared very relaxed. Via, miss, this doesn't seem to be the attitude toward an ally. I don't care about that, Via coldly said. You are just a target for my protection. Within 100 days, it's fine as long as you don't die. As for anything else, I don't care if you break your arms and legs. Cuchulainn laughed and turned around to walk back to his chair. After leaning on it, he looked at Via with some dissatisfaction. I've always been curious. Your teacher, could it be that all of his disciples are strange people like you? I heard that the crown prince of your empire, who likes men, is also your teacher's disciple, right? Via slowly walked over and quietly knelt down on a piece of felt not far from Cuchulainn. His eyelids drooped and he coldly said, Correction. I am not someone from the Byzantine Empire. So, please do not use words like your empire. Cuchulainn raised an eyebrow. Oh? Then which country are you from? Lantis? Or the Free Territory? Via's face remained indifferent. Must a person belong to a country? Cuchulainn was stunned for a moment before shaking his head. All right, I won't ask any more. Then, he frowned and said, Your teacher, Sai, why did he send someone like you? Although you're pretty, your personality is a bit too boring. In the beginning, you were quite pleasing to the eye. However, as time passed, the aura coming from your body could freeze people. It's better to be frozen than to be assassinated. Via closed his eyes. Cuchulainn was speechless, because he was unable to refute this woman. In fact, in the past 3 days, if it were not for this woman's protection, he would have nearly died at least 3 times. The first time, when he was riding a horse, this woman stopped him when he was about to get on the horse. Later, he found that there was a needle the length of a finger hidden under the saddle. It was hidden under the saddle. If one did not look carefully, one would not be able to see it. However, if one were to ride it, the needle would pierce into one's thigh. After checking it, he found that the needle was smeared with a strange poison. According to the witch doctor beside him, the poison could even kill a dragon. The second time, this woman checked his bedroom. In the end, she pointed at the vase in the bedroom and asked, Who arranged this? It was a type of flower that was rarely seen. However, it was said that the flower's fragrance was refreshing and it was liked by many noble women in Odin. Due to its rarity, this type of flower was also quite expensive. Originally, as a servant, Cuchulainn did not care about such a small matter. However, Via's attitude, which was as though he was facing a great enemy, made Cuchulainn realize that something was amiss. Via later explained that Cuchulainn had a habit of drinking a type of wine every day. This type of wine had a spice added to preserve it. This habit was known to many. However, there was a problem with this type of flower that was placed in the room. Originally, this flower did not seem to have any problems on its own. It also did not have any poison. However, when the spice in the wine that Cuchulainn drank was mixed with the fragrance of this flower, it would produce a strange poison. This kind of poison did not show any signs in a short period of time. It would slowly erode a person's body. First, it would make the person lazy. Then, it would make the body weak. However, after accumulating to a certain extent, it would make the person suddenly fall ill and finally die from vomiting blood. Wea also explained that such a method of poisoning must have been done by an expert in medicine. Cuchulainn was skeptical at first. However, after investigating, she finally found out that the personal maid who was in charge of the decoration in her room was indeed a spy sent by the other Prince Odin, who was her enemy. The third time was last night, when Cuchulainn found a new dancer. Halfway through the dance, Weah, who was next to her, suddenly jumped up, pulled out a dagger from his waist, and pierced the beautiful dancer's throat on the spot. At that time, Cuchulainn was shocked. Vaya did not say a word and returned to his seat. He quietly picked up a silk handkerchief and wiped the blood off the dagger. When Cuchulainn asked for the reason, Vaya only lightly replied, "That woman's fingernails." Later, after Cuchulainn had someone check carefully, they found that the dancer's left index finger's fingernail had been deliberately sharpened until it was as sharp as a knife. In the gaps of the fingernail, there was a strange poison smeared on it. Once the thin fingernail cut a person's skin, even if it was just a little bit of skin, the poison would seep in. This was a slow-acting poison. For 10 days, no one would notice it. After 10 days, the poison would have spread throughout the body. There was no cure. Immediately, the skin would start to itch. After 15 days, the body would fester and die. After Cuchulainn knew about it, even though she was a scheming person, she could not help but change her expression. That dancer was originally prepared to serve her in bed that night. If it wasn't for Weah, he wouldn't have been able to notice even a scratch on his body when he took off his clothes and faced each other naked in the middle of the night. At that time, she would be dead for sure. After these 3 times, Cuchulainn was finally convinced by this cold beauty. Originally, he did not think much of the mysterious Byzantium ally who sent people to protect him. With his skills, he could be considered a first-class expert. Why would he be afraid of an assassination? After 3 times, he was convinced. After that, Cuchulainn could not help but ask Vaya, "How many assassination methods do you know?" Weah thought for a moment and said, "I've read all the known cases of assassination in the past 300 years. In summary, there are a total of 114 different methods." "Then how many do you know?" 114. Cuchulainn let out a long sigh. "To be able to train a disciple like you, the #1 sage of the Byzantine Empire, Cavehill, must be an even more amazing person." Cavashir was sitting there with a leisurely expression. His wise, gentle, and clear eyes were quietly staring into the distance. This was a long street, and there was a restaurant facing the street. Cavashir was sitting by the window on the 2nd floor, and the place he was looking at was the street. Shea was walking leisurely. Cavashir seemed to sigh softly and muttered to himself, "Meeting him so soon, is it really appropriate? Polling for monthly votes at the beginning of the month, I am looking for a guaranteed monthly vote. Everyone, please help me to vote. Many of my friends have saved up tickets, saying that they want to wait for the spring festival to double the monthly vote. This is fake news. According to what I know, Chidien will not double the monthly votes during the spring festival. So, if you have tickets, please use them now. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidien.com. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 148. I wish our #1 administrator, Comrade Old Smoke, a happy birthday. Comrade Old Smoke who doesn't know what's good for him. Comrade Old Smoke who takes the blame. May his youth be everlasting and his vitality be everlasting. He will forever be ignorant of what's good for him. Let's not talk too much. Friends are important when they talk to each other. Old Yang, you understand. __. GR Chapter 142 Part 2 into one long chapter. What you see. Shea was walking down the street. At this moment, he was very relaxed and happy. The matter of this trip to the capital had already been settled. The matter of the title and reward had also been settled. The only thing left was to go through the process. According to Roar, now that His Majesty the Emperor has made it clear that you are under his protection, you can just relax and wait to be a noble. The only thing that made him angry was that he had accompanied General Adric to the Senate. Seeing the general being humiliated there, he felt indignant. However, after leaving the Senate, General Adrik's face did not show much anger. Instead, from his eyes, there was a hint of disappointment. Shea could not help but complain about the injustice. General Adrik only casually laughed. However, before they parted, he stared at Shea for a moment before saying in a low voice, "Shea, you are still young. There are some things that even if I tell you now, you may not be able to understand. Just remember one thing. If you have a belief in your heart, do not change it easily. If you change it easily, then it is not called a belief." Hearing this, Shea stared blankly. In his heart he seemed to understand, but not understand. General Audiobook didn't say anything more, just patted Shea's shoulder, gently smiled, and mounted his horse to leave. Shea returned to his residence alone. However, with something on his mind, he did not want to ride a horse. Instead, he led the horse slowly along the road. Along the way, he took in the sights of this miraculous city. Only then did the depression in his heart gradually dissipate. As he walked past a street corner, he suddenly felt a jolt in his heart. His keen senses, which he had cultivated in the wilderness for many years, seemed to have been stimulated by something external. His heart jumped. It felt as if something was secretly spying on him. Shea's eyes tightened and he immediately looked around. Finally, he saw a thin old man looking at him from the window on the second floor of a restaurant on the side of the street with a smile on his face. Although they were so far apart, Shea could still clearly feel the clarity and depth of the other party's gaze. Those eyes were as bright as the stars in the sky. Shea and the old man exchanged glances. The old man smiled and nodded, as if he was hinting something with his eyes. Shea frowned and pondered for a moment before striding into the restaurant. Walking up the steps of the second floor, the old man was sitting in front of the window, holding a book in his left hand. He lazily crossed his boots on the chair, half leaning against the wall, and cast a smile at Shea. Shea walked over. Without saying anything, he sat down across from the old man. Cavalier looked at Shea. Those clear eyes gave Shea the illusion that he had been completely seen through. He subconsciously turned his face to the side. "Are you hungry?" Cavalier's voice was calm. "If you are hungry, then eat some. This shop's sour broccoli with mashed potatoes is not bad." After saying that, he raised his hand and pointed at a plate on the table. The broccoli with mashed potatoes was yellow in color and smelled fragrant. It was indeed appetizing. Shea did not seem to mind. He grabbed the spoon on the table and took a bite. When the food entered his mouth, his eyes lit up. He put down the spoon and smiled. "It is indeed delicious." Cavalier nodded his head. There was a leisurely look on his face. "I have a small habit. I like to go around looking for small, inconspicuous shops. The real delicacies are often hidden in these small, inconspicuous places. As for those magnificent places, they are often just for show." Shea nodded his head and said, "You are right. When it comes to good food, it is not the place that matters. It is the taste that matters." Cavalier narrowed his eyes and reached his hand into his bosom. After feeling around for a while, he pulled out a small silver bottle and placed it on the table. "This is a condiment that I specially concocted. As for the recipe, I cannot tell you. However, when eaten with mashed potatoes, the taste is even better. Try it." Shea made up his mind and did not refuse. He grabbed the bottle and twisted it open. He sprinkled out some fine, silvery white powder and poured it on top of the mashed potatoes. After eating another spoonful, he suddenly beamed with joy. He clapped his hands and said, "Good, good, good! There is indeed a way. This mashed potatoes, I can actually taste meat. Ha 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 ha." Cavalier looked at the bottle and said, "Since you like it, I will give it to you." Then, the old man seemed to sigh faintly. "The taste of meat, it is a long story. Before I started, I was also a poor bookworm. I had to rely on my friends for 3 meals a day. This mashed potato was the cheapest and was my main meal. However, after eating too much, I inevitably missed the taste of meat. I looked up a lot of ancient books and almost became a chef. Only then did I come up with this condiment. When added to mashed potatoes, the taste of meat could be tasted. Although I could not afford meat, using this condiment could be considered a way to satisfy my craving. Shea stuffed the bottle into his bosom and raised his hand. Since you are giving it to me, I will accept it. Thank you, sir. No need to thank me. This is just a pitiful struggle of a person who was forced into a corner. It is not a big deal. Cavasher shook his head and smiled faintly. Take me for example. In the past, I was also considered to be extraordinary and thought that my wisdom was unparalleled. However, when I was hungry, how could I care about the ambitions in my heart? Yet, I used my wisdom on such a small trick. How laughable! Shea's eyes lit up and he stared at the old man. The country bumpkin squinted his eyes and said, Hey, old man, you seem to be hinting at something, right? Cavasher pursed his lips and smiled. Hinting? No, 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 if I am hinting at something with your current mind, you will not be able to understand. This is already very clear. Hungry, Shea lowered his head and thought for a moment. When he raised his head, he smiled and said, I understand. Thank you for your advice. When a person was starving, there was no need to talk about noble things. If they talk about other things when they are hungry, then it will become a joke. Old man, thank you for your advice. I was originally very angry about what happened today. However, after hearing what you said, I am not angry anymore. After saying that, Shea stood up and prepared to leave. Cavasher smiled and said, What is it? You don't even dare to say a few words to me? The country bumpkin was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled and said, I do not dare. Someone said that those who are related to you have long gone to the grave of Glory Mountain. I am still young and have no intention of going to that damned place to rest. Cavasher sighed and said, You know who I am. Shea stared at him and said, Of course I know. If I can't figure it out, do you really think I am a fool? Cavasher revealed a look of interest and said, Oh? Then, are you not curious as to why I am looking for you? Shea's face twitched and he hesitated for a moment. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. I am curious, but I do not dare to ask. Do not dare. Cavasher was truly curious this time. I do not dare. Shea nodded his head honestly and said, I do not dare. I have heard that you are too scary. Who am I? A country bumpkin who crawled out from the mountains. These days, coincidence upon coincidence, I have been fighting for my life to survive until now. Now, I have a little bit of money and I have become a minor aristocrat. What is there for me to be dissatisfied with? Let me put it this way, I have had enough. I have really had enough. I am King satisfied. He paused for a moment and looked at Cavasher. So, although I am curious as to what relationship you have with the old man who raised me. I am curious as to what that big stone you gave me is. I am even more curious as to why you sent someone to find me the moment I arrived at the imperial capital. You said that you wanted to meet me. To you, I'm just a little weed. What's so special about me? So, Lao Tzu was scared. I cannot afford to provoke this kind of thing, but Lao Tzu can hide from it. I was thinking that after these few days, I would go back to the north and become that bullshit military officer. I would be a local tyrant, tyrannical and greedy for a little money. Even if I had to run amok, I would still be able to enjoy a little glory. Damn it, being able to live to this extent is already a few hundred times better than what I expected when I crawled out from the mountains. What is there for me to be dissatisfied with? So, you are too deep, too scary, too troublesome. I do not dare to provoke you. Although I have so many doubts in my heart, I still hide far away. Between you and the old man who raised me, whether it is gratitude or resentment, he is already dead and buried underground. His bones can be used to beat drums. So, don't involve Lao Tzu in your matters. I don't care, I don't care, I can't care, I can't care. When the country bumpkin said those words, his expression was very serious. He spoke word by word and his eyes were calm. The more Cavasher listened, the more odd his expression became. After the country bumpkin finished speaking, this wise old man could not help but open his mouth as though he wanted to say something. However, in the end, he shook his head and the smile on his face became somewhat strange. I did not expect you to have such indifference. Cavasher frowned. I did not expect this. It seems my old friend's teaching of you is a success. Knowing how to be content, this is something that ordinary people cannot do in their lifetime. For you to be able to understand this principle is quite rare. Cavasher narrowed his eyes and seemingly pondered for a moment. Wait a moment. There is a play that I have arranged for you. After you finish watching it, you can leave. Although Shea was unwilling, he did not know why. In front of this old man, as long as the old man's calm and clear eyes swept over him, the country bumpkin could not help but feel goosebumps rising in his heart. He could not help but sit back down on the chair. Sure enough, not long after, he suddenly heard footsteps coming from the stairs. Then, he saw two valiant-looking giant men rushing over anxiously. One of them looked to be around 40 years old. His face was filled with anxiety, and he wore silver armor. He looked like a general in the army. As for the young giant beside him, he was actually the giant man from the 4 prodigies of the royal city, Enchantment. Both of them had square faces with distinct outlines. Putting aside their age, their facial features were somewhat similar. The middle-aged general came before Cavasher and gave a long sigh. He quickly lowered his head and said, "Your Excellency, I have finally found you." After saying that, he forcefully pulled Enchantment over and kicked him on the back of his knee. He frowned and shouted, "Idiot! Kneel down." Enchantment's face was filled with reluctance. However, the kick of the middle-aged general was very forceful. Enchantment cried out in pain and fell to his knees in front of Cavasher. The middle-aged general raised his hand and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency, this nephew of mine is too much of a scoundrel. By the time I found out about this, it was already too late. I have already given this kid a good beating. However, the trouble he has caused, I hope that you can help to solve it." After saying that, he glanced at Shea who was beside him. He wanted to say something but hesitated. "General Span." Cavasher was still leaning on the chair. He said indifferently, "You are the general of the royal city's imperial guards. I am not worthy of your salutation." General Span's face turned red. He hesitated for a moment. Then, he ruthlessly kicked Enchantment a few more times. He only stopped when Enchantment was howling incessantly. Then, he only stared at Cavasher without saying anything. Shea was stunned. This old man, what does he want to do? You still don't understand? Cavasher looked at Shea and said softly, "Your reputation, you injured Hastings on the battlefield." This sentence was written in black and white in the battle report. "This is the title given to you, a halo. However, giving it to you is His Majesty's decision. It is also my intention. This title is given to you and only to you. Even if it is you, you cannot casually give it to others. Do you understand? As for this kid, he does not have the qualifications to accept it." Shea opened his mouth. He had been living a lot more peacefully these past few days. To a large extent, it was because he had deliberately lost to Enchantment that day. He had given the limelight to this idiot so that he could have a peaceful life. Enchantment, this is your name, right? Cavasher looked at the guy on the ground. Enchantment was originally full of resentment. He was an idiot. How could he be willing to give up? Although he had been beaten by his uncle, he did not dare to resist because of his uncle's prestige. In fact, he was very unwilling in his heart. However, when Cavasher's cold and indifferent eyes looked at him, Eniguer suddenly felt a chill in his heart. This gaze did not contain any killing intent. However, it made Eniguer's heart feel an indescribable fear. The bit of unwillingness in his heart also disappeared in an instant. This time, you have also learned your lesson. Speaking of which, I have already made an exception for you. From now on, listen to your uncle. General Span, you are His Majesty's trusted person. The royal guards are under your command. You should also share His Majesty's worries. Yes, I understand. General Span quickly lowered his head. He looked at Cavachir. Seeing that Cavachir had closed his eyes and had no intention to speak again, he felt relieved. He knew that this matter was over. He quickly raised his hand and grabbed Eniguer's back. What are you still doing? Go home. Wait a moment. Cavachir opened his eyes and frowned slightly. Since there is a beginning, there must be an end. This reputation and title, you should return it the same way you obtained it. General Span's face changed. His eyes flickered. After hesitating for a moment, he finally gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, Eniguer, don't blame Uncle for being ruthless. The general suddenly pulled out his long sword. With a crashing sound, he raised his sword and split open the windowsill beside him. Then, he grabbed Eniguer and kicked his thigh. Eniguer pitifully screamed. His body flew out from the window. With a bang, he fell from the second floor onto the street. Immediately, the street was startled and shouted. General Span was standing by the windowsill. Facing the outside, he gathered his strength and shouted loudly. King City's fourth talent, Guer's martial skills are low, far inferior to Mr. Xia Lei Ming. Today, he has lost and is sincerely convinced. That day, he launched a sneak attack. Today, he is punished by Mr. Xia. Serves him right. Span used all his strength to shout out those two sentences 3 times. Then, he turned around and saluted Cavachir. Then, he turned around and ran down the stairs. On the street outside, Eniguer had fallen to the point where he could no longer stand up. It would appear that his injuries were not light. Xia was completely dumbfounded. Cavachir appeared to be very satisfied. He retracted his gaze and continued to look at Xia without the slightest bit of anger. You. Xia's lips squirmed a few times. Then, he suddenly became angry. His anger surged as he said angrily, What are you doing? That day I had deliberately lost to him. He did not provoke me. If anyone is to blame, I am the one who caused this fellow's downfall. Cavachir's eyes gradually turned cold, and he said indifferently, I want you to understand that there are some things that you can do and some things that you cannot do. He paused for a moment and then said in a more serious tone, There are some things that you can refuse when given to you. There are some things that you cannot refuse when given to you. Even more so, you cannot give them to others. Do you understand? Xia's face turned somewhat pale. It was not due to fear. Rather, it was due to anger. You must be very angry. You must think that I am too domineering and unreasonable. Cavachir said coolly, I want you to understand that as long as I am willing, there are many things that I can do regardless of reason. That is power. Xia bit his lips. You should be content. You want to back down, you want to hide. Unfortunately, that is not up to you. Cavachir sneered and his eyes gradually turned sharp. It was like a needle piercing into Xia's heart. Unless you had never come out from that mountain back then and decided to stay in that mountain forever as a hunter, naturally, no one would care about you. However, since you have come out, this matter is no longer up to you. Because you need to know that there are many things that, once begun, cannot be stopped, not to mention, this matter had begun many years ago. Whether you are willing or not, this is your fate. Unless you become strong one day, stronger than me, stronger than everything else. But before that, what path do I want you to take? After saying that, Cavachir stared into Xia's eyes. You cannot resist. Shea really wanted to pull out his flaming fork and hack at him. However, when facing this Cavalier, although he appeared calm and did not emit any killing intent, the feeling of goosebumps rising from his heart gave him an inexplicable certainty. I am no match for this old man. I, son of a bitch. Shea hesitated again and again. In the end, he did not pull out his flaming fork. Instead, he spat out and stared at Cavalier. Just what do you want me to do? Cavalier smiled gently. It is very simple. I will tell you step by step. If I tell you too much, I fear that you will not be able to comprehend it. Now that you have taken back the title of defeating Hastings, you can go live your life as a little aristocrat. And, before you leave the imperial capital, send someone to deliver a book as a gift to my house. Consider it an apprenticeship. Apprenticeship? Shea's eyes turned round. He had heard from Roar that one of Cavalier's disciples was the Empire's crown prince, His Royal Highness. From this, it could be seen that anyone who could become this fellow's disciple was no ordinary person. Yes, is it strange? Cavalier appeared somewhat tired. He had said too much today and was somewhat exhausted. He rubbed his eyebrows and sighed. Meeting you today is much earlier than I had expected. The timing was also not the best. You little brat, you have exceeded my expectations by quite a bit. However, the more you are like this, the more interested I am. Your adoptive father taught you quite well. Unfortunately, he only managed to teach you half of it before dying. Then, I will finish the rest for him. When Shea heard this, he was so angry that he laughed. Ah, I have heard of rape. I have never heard of forcefully taking in a disciple. What if Lao Tzu refuses? Cavalier was not angry. He smiled calmly. You will agree. Shea was at a loss for words. He snorted a few times and rolled his eyes. The Crown Prince is also your disciple. He must hate me to death. Could it be? This is not a problem. Cavalier did not even hesitate. He said casually, Garcia will not provoke you. Since I am protecting you, then this problem is no longer a problem. I don't believe it. He is the Crown Prince. Shea snorted coldly. If he dares to do that. Cavalier smiled and raised his hand to point to the stairs. Then he will no longer be the Crown Prince. Well, you can go now. When Shea walked down the stairs to the street, he was still a little confused. He only felt that the meeting and conversation with Cavalier upstairs just now was like a dream. That old man did not look imposing at all. He was calm and tranquil, but he was so terrifying. Apprentice? The country bumpkin really wanted to laugh out loud. Lao Tzu apprentice your ass. But he could not help but feel anxious. Cavalier's sentence seemed calm, but it was full of certainty. You will agree, damn it, even if Lao Tzu fell out with him, could he hold down Lao Tzu's head and worship him? Shea thought fiercely in his heart. It was not without the intention of cheering himself on. He was in a bad mood and was not in the mood to stroll around. After he came out, he mounted his horse and quickly returned to his residence. When he reached home and entered the courtyard, he saw a thin and weak figure in the courtyard. He was wearing a ridiculously large leather armor and carrying 2 or 3 somewhat bloated bags. Shea stared. Todoro, what are you doing? Are you trying to steal something and escape? When the magician saw Shea return, he suddenly trembled and the bag in his hand fell to the ground. He struggled for a moment before he gritted his teeth and said, Master, I have to go. I have thought about it. I have decided to go to the trial. Shea frowned. Are you crazy? You know that I have already been knighted. If you follow me in the future, there will be a good way out. Why go to some elf place to seek death? On Theodore's ugly and wretched face, an unswerving glint of determination flashed across his eyes. Master, I am a magician. collect monthly tickets, bring the monthly tickets, hand them all in, _. If you want to know what will happen, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 149. GOR Chapter 143. What a big show! Normally, Shea would only need to glare at the Magus and his legs would go soft in fright. But now, Shea stared at Todoro with wide eyes. Yet, this fellow's expression remained firm and unwavering. After a long time, Shea sighed and said, "Fine." Todoro was immediately overjoyed. He bowed to Shea and said, "Master, if I can successfully return with the title of Magus, I will definitely seek refuge with you." Shea laughed heartily and looked at Theodore. "You, this guy, can't carry anything with your hands, can't carry anything with your shoulders, eat more than others, and do less work than others, so what's the use of you coming to me?" But soon after, Shea stepped forward and hugged Theodore, fiercely hugging him, then whispered in the magician's ear, "Hey, you, although I don't think highly of you and usually bully and tease you, but at the end of the day we still know each other. You are also someone who came from the battlefield with me." Although those words were spoken softly, the sincerity in his tone was rare. The Magus' hands loosened and the bag he was carrying fell to the ground. His face revealed a trace of sluggishness. Then, his eyes gradually revealed his emotions. "That Shea, you idiot, call me master." Shea released Todoro and knocked heavily on his head. Then, he took 2 steps back and narrowed his eyes. "You don't have to leave now. After all, the time limit for that trial is 100 days. How long has it been? There is still time. With your current ability, that life curse magic will consume your life force every time you use it. That is why you have never tried it before. You don't know how powerful it is or whether it is effective. With your current ability, Humph, even if you go to the wildfire plains, you will be eaten by the magical beasts in less than 2 days. I heard that the anarchic lands, the sea of forests where the elves live, is even more dangerous than the wildfire plains. If you go there, who knows when you'll be turned into the dung of magical beasts. And there are still many days left. Don't be in such a hurry to leave. I'll train you well during these days. I'll teach you some skills so that you can learn some self-defense martial arts. Once we're outside, we'll have a better chance of survival." Todoro was moved to tears. Shea tilted his head and shouted, "Sharba, ka tua." Not long after, they heard Shea's roar. They saw Sharba and Ka-tua running out from the backyard with bowls of rice in their hands. Sharba's mouth was greasy. They didn't know what kind of meat he had stuffed into his mouth. He said vaguely, "Motherf ***, you're still howling when you're eating. Do you want to live?" Shea chuckled and gave Todoro a push. "This guy is going out to do some dangerous business. If you have time, help me teach him some skills." After tossing the Magus to the 2 cavalrymen, Shea returned to his room. Today, he had many things on his mind. As he sat in his room, many thoughts flooded his mind. Suddenly, he couldn't help but think of a question. Earlier, whether it was General Adric or that old freak Cavashir, both of them seemed to have mentioned a word, faith. General Adric's faith was that white-robed senator, while Todoro's faith was most likely the Magus. Even Todoro had his own faith. Then, what was Lao Tzu's faith? This was probably the first time in his life that this country bumpkin was so alone and introspective. It was also the first time in his life that he thought of these serious and profound questions. The young country bumpkin probably still didn't understand what the so-called faith was. But even Todoro, who he usually looked down on, had faith. If he didn't have faith, it seemed a little inappropriate. My faith, what is it? General Adaric's appointment was rejected by the Senate, and this news was quickly spread throughout the imperial capital by people with ulterior motive. There were 3 results of this incident. Some people thought that the Senate had slapped the Emperor in the face. Some people thought that the Senate had slapped him in the face, because Adrik himself was a supporter of the Senate, while others thought that the Senate was on the side of the warlord. However, as these rumors spread throughout the capital, there was a rumor from the palace. It was said that when the Qigong Emperor himself heard that the Senate had rejected Adrik's appointment that day, instead of being angry, he laughed heartily. That night, he drank 2 more glasses of wine than usual for dinner. That night, he also had a rather intimate night with a newly selected beautiful personal maid. Subsequently, the appointment was repassed by His Majesty to the aristocratic parliament. It was passed on the same day, and took effect immediately after it was handed over to the military. However, General Adrik himself did not go to the aristocratic parliament to participate in the review process. He was invited to the Imperial Military Academy that day and gave an impassioned speech to hundreds of students of the Imperial Military Academy. This famous and fierce general of the empire was quite prestigious among the students. His speech made the young students' blood boil and caused a sensation in the academy. Many of the students who had graduated that year changed their letter of intent to apply for enlistment. According to the statistics after the event, half of them applied for enlistment in the 13th Cavalry Regiment, which was the unit that General Adrik had served for the longest time. There were also some who directly stopped General Adrik after the speech and petitioned in person to be transferred to his side as a guard or adjutant. It was said that Adrik had tears in his eyes at that time, but he could only reject the requests of these students one by one. These news reached the ears of Fatso and Roer. This rabbit general was already packing his luggage at home and was preparing to depart for the 13th Corps when he heard the news. It was said that General Roer sighed deeply at that time and suddenly appeared to be in low spirits. He dismissed his attendants and sat alone for a long time. He was also very drunk at night when he heard the news. In his drunken stupor, Fatso drew his sword and carved a line of words on the wall in one breath. Bright blood. No way to serve the country. The next day, when Fatso woke up and saw the words he had carved with his sword, he laughed loudly and waved his hand to erase the words on the wall. Fatso didn't even bid farewell to Shea. He only sent someone to deliver a letter to the country bumpkin before leaving the imperial capital with a group of guards and attendants. They were heading to the 13th Cavalry Corps to take up their new post. On the same day, the senior instructor of the Imperial Military Academy, who used to hold the military rank of a general and was nicknamed Mad Dog Green, officially submitted his resignation to the academy. At the same time, he also submitted an application for transfer to the Imperial Military Headquarters. The words in the application were tough. It stated that if he couldn't be transferred this time, then he would rather retire and return home, giving up his identity as a soldier. This application was sent to the military headquarters on the same day. At night, a copy of the application appeared on the desk of a study in a quiet manner in the southern suburbs of Ostjilla. A white-haired old man held a magnifying glass and carefully read the application with his muddy eyes. He then let out a long sigh. The back of the old man's hand was thin and his veins were bulging. Finally, he let out a long sigh. He raised his head and looked at the wall. On the wall of the study, a broken sword was hanging there. Only 1/3 of the blade was left and the broken part was jagged. There was a green luster left on the blade. The old man hesitated for a moment before finally picking up a pen and writing his name on the copy of the application. Minas. Some people in the military headquarters sneered when they saw Green's application. Originally, this application was destined to be thrown into a rubbish bin. However, at the last moment, the copy of the application with the name, Minas, was sent to the military headquarters. After some people saw it, the final result changed. On the same day, General Green's application was approved. Investigate the Imperial Military Academy's instructor Green. He is incompetent in teaching and has led the students astray. He is to be removed from the position of instructor in a military academy. His original military rank will be demoted and he will be transferred to the local garrison of Moore County. It is hoped that this member will take this as a warning and repent for his mistakes. He will redeem himself and serve the Empire. He will not let down the glory of the Empire's eagle flag. This order. After receiving the transfer order issued by the military headquarters, Glenn did not even look at the words such as incompetent teaching. He only saw the words, transferred to be a battalion officer of the Moore County Local Garrison Emblem Group, and laughed wildly. After laughing, this mad dog general tore the order into pieces and threw it into the rubbish bin. He even raised his middle finger. TSK idiot! Adric was promoted to Deputy Minister of Military Affairs and was immediately assigned to patrol the southern military region. Rohr also left the capital and Green had already set off for Moore County. Only the country bumpkin himself was left in the capital, waiting bitterly for the official appointment document from the military headquarters. The vetting process of the nobility in the aristocratic parliament had not been completed, and this made the country bumpkin very anxious. However, the good thing was that the news of his promotion and transfer to the military chief of Moore County had been spread. It was said that he was summoned by His Majesty, and the news of his nobility in the aristocratic parliament had also spread. There were no more troublemakers coming to cause trouble. After all, a country bumpkin with no one to rely on was easy to provoke. However, with the title of Baron and the position of military chief of a county with tens of thousands of troops, the country bumpkin at least had his own capital. Those troublemakers did not dare to provoke him. He took advantage of these few days of carefree fun to finally remember the companions he met on the way to the capital. He sent someone to contact Alfracat of the 50th Wolf's Fong Regiment. Naturally, Lantis and Gouraud were also attracted. After everyone gathered twice and got drunk twice, Shea showed some signs of wanting to recruit him, and Alfracat readily agreed. Putting aside Shea's kindness to Alfracat, the country bumpkin was about to control the military and political power of a county and become a tyrant. If he followed such a boss, he would be able to get an official position in the future. It was much better than being a nameless warrior of the pugilistic world. Alfracat quickly expressed that he would bring all his brothers from the 50th Wolf's Fong Regiment to take up the post with Shea. From today onwards, they would be considered as the country bumpkin's subordinate. As for Gouraud, the spy leader of Lantis men, he was naturally very happy. On the way here, he had already determined that Shea was not an ordinary person. Sure enough, after arriving at the capital for a few days, he received news that he was promoted to military chief of a county and was even conferred the title of Baron, hereditary. It seemed that the Emperor of the Byzantine Empire greatly admired this person. Moreover, this country bumpkin was not even 20 years old and had the Emperor's favor. Looking at the future, his future was boundless. Such a star of hope was naturally worth making friends with. After Gouraud returned, he consulted with his superiors and decided to increase the budget. He had to make friends with this future star of the Byzantine Empire's political scene regardless of the cost. Gouraud thought about it for a long time. Since this fellow started off as a martial artist, he was naturally a warrior by nature. Giving him money would be too vulgar and might not be able to obtain a sincere friendship. After pondering for a long time, he finally prepared a special gift and personally delivered it to Shea's residence. This gift was not gold, silver, jewels, or beautiful dancers, but a bow. Other than being famous for their naval strength, the Lantis men also had a unique style of longbow soldiers. The Lantis were experts in bows, especially longbows. The bow that was given to Shea was a high-grade one. The bow was made from a rare white rhinoceros skin, the bow was made from fine steel, and the bowstring was made from the tendons of a giant snake that grew in the sea. It was also soaked in whale glue, and it took 3 years to complete. It was said that the person who made this bow was a famous master bow maker in the Lantis kingdom. When he was young, he traveled the continent and somehow managed to establish a relationship with the dwarves. He learned some of the dwarven craftsman's skills and became a famous bow maker when he returned to the Lantis kingdom. This bow was made in his later years. At that time, he made a total of 3 bows. The other 2 were in the possession of famous martial artists in the Lantis kingdom. The bow that was given to Shea was 1.5 meters long, almost as tall as a person. It was called Gathering Howl. When used, the arrows shot out were powerful and sharp, bringing with them a sound similar to a tsunami. It was obvious that Gurod had spent a lot of money in order to befriend Shea. Shea was very happy to receive this bow. This kind of longbow was suitable for people like him who were tall and strong. The country bumpkin tried to draw the big bow in front of Gurod. When the Gathering Howl bow entered his hand, he could feel the power within it. Even with the country bumpkin's monstrous strength, he still had to concentrate before he could draw the bow to its fullest. When he tried, the bowstring vibrated, and with a buzzing sound, it was as if a strong wind was blowing. Although he did not shoot an arrow, just the vibration of the bowstring was enough to split a piece of white paper on the table in front of him into 2. The country bumpkin was overjoyed and tried again. But the result with the country bumpkin's strength, he could only draw the bow to its fullest 3 times. On the 4th time, his strength was insufficient. Good bow! Shea was very excited. After all, he was young and vigorous. He liked this kind of powerful weapon the most. Moreover, this bow was so strong that even he could only draw it to its fullest 3 times. Obviously, it was an extraordinary treasure. Gurod looked at Shea trying the bow and could not help but have a strange expression. After the bow was delivered, the warriors and guards under his command all tested it out of curiosity. The captain of the warriors and guards under his command already had the strength of a mid-order level 4 warrior, but even after expending a lot of effort and even using his do-chi, he still couldn't draw the bow to the fullest. This Shea casually drew the bow to its fullest 3 times without even using do-chi. It seemed that this guy was indeed a strong person who defeated Hastings on the battlefield. Gurod did not know that Shea did not have do-chi at all. Suppressing the excitement in his heart, Gurod presented 20 iron spine armor-piercing arrows and said with a smile, "Lord Shea, although these arrows were not made by a master bow maker, they were still made by a skilled craftsman in my country, Lantis. The 3-edged arrowhead's lethality is naturally extraordinary. The arrowhead weighs 3 pounds and is most suitable for this kind of strong bow. More importantly, the arrowhead is smeared with fish oil made from a type of demonic fish that grows in the sea. After soaking in it, it was fumigated 3 times and the medicinal power has already soaked in it. Although it is not poisonous, it is somewhat effective in breaking through some magical defenses." Magic-breaking attribute? Shea's eyes lit up. Guluo gave the gift and felt relieved. The value of this howling bow was immeasurable, let alone the fact that it was impossible to measure. Moreover, these 20 specially made iron spine armor-piercing arrows were worth hundreds of gold coins. This generous gift had already made Gurod take out the whole year's budget. It could be seen that he had put in a lot of money. After Shea received this bow, he was like a child who got his favorite toy. He loved it so much that he even put it next to his bed when he slept. His archery skills were actually not very good. After all, he was born in the mountains and did not carefully practice archery. However, after receiving this bow, he made himself a target in the courtyard and tried a few times during the day when he was free. The result was that Shea's archery skills were very average. He tried shooting from 50 steps away and out of 10 arrows, 3 or 4 would miss the target. As for the arrows that hit the target, there were only 2 that hit the bullseye. Unfortunately, the people beside him, Katua and Sharba were both cavalrymen. Although they were proficient in riding and charging, their archery skills were ordinary. Alfracat was a proper warrior and also dabbled in archery. However, he was only proficient in it and was far from being proficient. After trying it out, he was only slightly better than Shea. Having a good bow is not enough. Lao Tzu needs to find someone to practice his archery skills. Otherwise, no matter how good the bow is, it will be a waste if it can't hit the target. Shea sighed. Alfracat heard this and his eyes lit up. Sir Shea, I have an idea. The competition has already started. This time, warriors from all over the kingdom have gathered in the capital. Among them, there are quite a few famous archers. We might as well go and observe the competition. Maybe we can gain something. Competition? Shea also slapped his head. This was such a big event. He had been so busy these past few days that he almost forgot about it. This was a very big and lively event. With Shea's temperament, how could he not go and observe? The country bumpkin was a person who would immediately act on whatever he thought of. He did not wait any longer and directly dragged Alfracat out of the door and went to the vicinity of the arena. The annual warrior competition in Byzantium had already started. However, there were still some days before the official competition. These days, only some preliminary rounds had started. Alfracat knew that Shea did not understand these rules, so he briefly explained them on the way. This competition is the best way for the warriors of Byzantium to stand out. If you can stand out in the competition and win fame and fortune, not only will you get a generous prize but also the fame. In the future, when you recruit new people to expand the size of the warrior group, it will also be very beneficial. If you are valued by some noble or powerful person, you can jump into the rich and powerful family and enter the upper class of the kingdom. The competition started every year at the beginning of spring, but the process was getting more and more complicated. Generally speaking, warriors who had achieved good results in the previous year's competition did not need to go through the preliminary round and could directly enter the official competition. But for some new warriors or those who had poor results in the previous year's competition, they could only start from the preliminary round. The rules were generally like this. After registration for the preliminary round, according to the rules of the competition, the warriors who registered on the same day could draw opponents on the same day. They would be arranged to appear on the same day. If they win, they will get 1 point, and if they lose, 1 point will be deducted. The preliminary round lasts for 10 days. There is no limit to the number of times each warrior can participate. After the 10 days of preliminary round, everyone's points will be calculated. The 100 people with the highest points will be able to enter the official competition. However, there is another rule. If you win in a row, your points will be doubled. If you win the first game, you will get 1 point on the spot. If you win the second game, you will get 2 points on the spot. If you win the third game, you will get 4 points on the spot. The more consecutive wins, the more amazing the points you will get. At this point, Alfracat was quite proud. 2 years ago, in the preliminary round, I won 4 games in a row. At that time, it was considered rare. However, I heard that in all the previous competitions, there was only one person who won all the way from the preliminary round without a single loss. Consecutive wins. Shea frowned. You said that the opponents are all decided by drawing lots at the last minute. If that's the case, it's inevitably unfair. If a low-level warrior draws a high-level opponent, wouldn't it be terrible? Alfracat smiled faintly. That's up to fate. If your strength is not good enough, even if you get a good draw and enter the official competition by luck, you will still lose in the end. After a pause, he added, however, there are some people who are not good enough. They know that they have no hope of achieving good results in the official competition. Some people are opportunistic, hoping to draw a weaker opponent in the preliminary round and get a few wins to make a name for themselves. However, these people are in the minority. When it comes to the official competition stage, you can't do it. The official competition stage is still carried out by drawing lot. However, each person is only allowed 3 chances to lose. After losing 3 times, you will be directly eliminated. In the official competition, it is even more difficult to win consecutively. The two of them chatted as they walked. Not long after, they arrived at the arena located in the imperial capital. Looking from afar, there was a tall building at the end of the road. It was more than 10 meters tall and looked like a city wall. It was built with huge stones and flags fluttered on top of it. Looking around, there was a sea of people on the road. The pedestrians were all wearing various kinds of leather armor and carrying long sabers, swords, hammers, axes, and other weapons. Under the huge building, several doors were wide open. Dozens of topless strong men stood there. However, the road was still blocked by the warriors coming and going. From afar, they could hear the sound of thunderous shouts coming from behind the walls of the arena. I'll say it again. I don't care about right or wrong. I only focus on writing. I solicit vote. I write my book. I don't care about others. Everyone supports me. Just subscribe and vote. That's enough. Don't worry about anything else. Dance. Book friends. Let's read in peace. Vote. I'll do my own thing. Okay? To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.